The storm had been building for hours. Rhea Calder should have turned back when the first flakes began to fall, should have listened to the tight knot of warning in her gut. But listening to her instincts had never been a luxury she could afford. The merchant company didn't care about instincts or warnings or whether the sky looked wrong. They cared about schedules and deliveries and profit margins and disposable workers who asked no questions. So she'd climbed onto the supply wagon that morning despite the pewter sky, despite the wind that tasted like iron and ice, despite being the only driver willing to take the mountain pass route in late autumn. The regular drivers had all found convenient excuses. Family obligations, prior commitments. One man had simply looked at the route manifest and walked away without a word. That should have told her something, but Rhea had learned early that people like her didn't get the luxury of choice. You took the jobs others refused, swallowed your fear, and hoped tomorrow would be different. It never was, but hope was cheap and stubbornness was free. The pass had been treacherous from the start. The wagon wheels fought for purchase on ground that shifted between mud and ice, never quite solid, never quite liquid. The two draft horses, old, tired creatures that deserved better than this, struggled against their harnesses, eyes rolling white with each gust of wind. Rhea had whispered apologies to them all morning, her voice lost in the growing roar of the storm. By noon, the snow had transformed from scattered flakes into a wall of white that erased the world. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The road, if it could still be called that, became a guess, a prayer, a gamble. Rhea had wrapped the reins around her numb hands and leaned forward, squinting against the assault of ice crystals that felt like needles against her face. Just a little further, she'd told the horses, told herself. Over the ridge and down. Just a little further. The merchants back in Millridge had promised the route was clear, had sworn the weather would hold another week. But merchants lied as easily as they breathed, especially to workers they considered expendable. And Rhea had always been expendable. 26 years of being expendable taught you to recognize your value in other people's eyes. Precisely none. She'd been orphaned at 8 when fever took both parents within 3 days of each other. The neighbors who'd promised her mother they'd see the girl looked after had looked after their own interests instead, dividing her parents' modest possessions and sending Rhea to the parish workhouse with a pat on the head and practiced expressions of regret. The workhouse had been exactly what places run on charity and righteousness always were. Cruel in quiet ways, harsh in loud ones. Rhea had learned to make herself small, to work hard, to expect nothing. At 16, she'd aged out with no family, no prospects, and no illusions. The next decade had been a blur of temporary positions and broken promises. Housemaid jobs that ended when the lady of the house decided Rhea's plain face was somehow still threatening. Factory work that paid starvation wages and cost 2 fingers of the woman working next to her. Seamstress positions where she'd worked 16-hour days and been let go when business slowed. Always the first dismissed, never the first considered when hiring resumed. Men had occasionally shown interest, the wrong kind of interest, the kind that came with expectations and assumptions, the kind that saw a woman alone as a woman available. Rhea had learned to spot that look from across a room and disappear before it could follow her home. She'd also learned that reporting such men did nothing except make you unemployable. Apparently being harassed was fine, but making trouble about it was not. So when the merchant company had offered her the freight job, steady work, they'd said, good pay for someone willing to handle the difficult routes, she'd taken it despite the warning signs, despite the fact that none of the men would work with her, despite the supervisor's smirk when he handed her the assignments no one else wanted. Steady work was steady work. And if you had to risk your life for it? Well, Rhea had been risking her life in smaller ways for years. At least a mountain pass would kill you quick. She hadn't expected it to actually happen. The moment the road gave way beneath the wagon's right wheels, Rhea had perhaps 2 seconds to understand what was occurring. The ground, unstable from freeze-thaw cycles and undermined by runoff, simply ceased to exist. The wagon lurched sideways with a groan of wood and metal that sounded almost alive, almost aware of its own destruction. The horses screamed, a sound Rhea had never heard before, pure terror translated into noise. She'd lunged for the brake, for the reins, for anything that might stop the inevitable. Her hands closed on empty air. The world tilted. Rhea was airborne for a heartbeat, weightless and terrified, and then the ground came up to meet her with brutal finality. The impact drove the air from her lungs in a violent expulsion that left her gasping like a landed fish. Pain exploded through her left side, her ribs, her hip, her shoulder, everything at once and all of it wrong. She'd barely registered the first wave of agony when the wagon followed her down. Time fractured into frozen moments, the shadow of the wagon blocking out the gray sky. The sound of wood splintering, metal screeching, the crushing weight slamming across her torso. The wet crack of bones breaking. Then pain beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Pain that whited out thought, that reduced the universe to a single burning point of wrongness centered in her chest. She'd tried to scream but couldn't draw breath, tried to move but her body refused every command. The wagon had landed on its side, the cargo bed crushing her from sternum to pelvis, the weight distributed just precisely enough to trap rather than kill outright. One wheel still spun lazily above her, squeaking with each rotation. Snow fell through the spokes in lazy spirals. Ria's right arm was pinned beneath her body, completely numb. Her left arm was free but useless. Something fundamental was broken in her shoulder, the joint ground glass and fire every time she tried to move. Her legs existed somewhere below the crushing weight, but she couldn't feel them, couldn't tell if they were shattered or simply compressed beyond sensation. Blood pooled beneath her, hot and wrong against the snow. She could feel it spreading, could smell the copper tang mixing with pine and ice. Each attempted breath was a shallow sip that fed screaming agony instead of life. The horses were gone. She couldn't hear them anymore, couldn't see them, either dead in the fall or fled in panic. Either way, she was alone. The storm howled around her, indifferent to her suffering. Snow began to accumulate on the exposed surfaces of the wagon, on her face, on her chest. Cold crept into the spaces where blood had been, patient and inexorable. Ria stared up at the white sky and understood with crystal clarity that she was going to die here. Not quickly. The wagon had her pinned precisely wrong for that mercy. She would die slowly, bleeding out in increments, freezing by degrees, drowning in her own fluids as her crushed lungs filled. It might take hours. No one would come. The pass was too dangerous in this weather, and no one would risk themselves for her anyway. They never had before. Why would today be different? The company would eventually send someone to investigate the lost wagon when it failed to arrive. They'd find her in spring probably when the snow melted. They'd make note of the lost cargo, write off the cost, hire someone new. Her name might appear in a report somewhere, attached to an inventory of damages. That would be her legacy, a line item in a loss statement. 26 years of struggling to matter, to be seen, to count for something, and she'd end as a financial footnote. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. Even dying, she was still invisible. Blood continued its slow leak from her body. Her extremities were going numb now, the cold working inward with methodical patience. Her thoughts began to drift, to fragment. This was shock, she knew. The body's mercy before the end. Part of her welcomed it. She was so tired, tired of fighting for scraps, tired of being dismissed and overlooked and used. Tired of hoping tomorrow might be different. Maybe this was easier. Maybe surrender was its own kind of victory. The snow fell harder. The world narrowed to the space beneath the wagon, a coffin of wood and white. Ria's vision began to blur at the edges, darkness creeping in like the cold. This was how it ended then, alone on a mountain, crushed beneath cargo. No one needed urgently enough to risk good drivers. Forgotten, before she was even gone. Her eyes drifted closed. Somewhere in the distance, something moved. Ria's eyes snapped open, or tried to. Her eyelids were heavy, crusted with ice. The movement registered more as sound than sight. The crunch of boots on snow, rhythmic and purposeful. Hallucination, she thought. The dying brain's last kindness, inventing rescue where none existed. But the footsteps grew louder, closer. A shadow fell across her field of vision, blocking out the gray sky. A face appeared above her, framed by the wagon's undercarriage. A man. Older, maybe 40, maybe 50. Hard to tell behind the ice-crusted beard and the lines carved deep around his eyes. Those eyes were striking even through her fading vision. Pale gray, almost colorless, sharp with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in her life. "Stay with me," he said. His voice was low, rough with disuse, but absolutely certain. Not a question, a command. Ria tried to speak, managed only a wet gurgle. Blood bubbled at the corner of her mouth. The man's jaw tightened. He moved out of her field of vision, and she heard him circling the wreck, his footsteps quick and purposeful. She couldn't turn her head to track him, couldn't do anything but stare up at the falling snow and wonder if she'd imagined him entirely. Then he was back, kneeling in the snow beside her visible shoulder. "Listen to me," he said, his face inches from hers. "I'm going to lift this wagon. When I do, you're going to have maybe 30 seconds of additional circulation before shock hits harder. Use that time to breathe, deep as you can. Understand?" Rhea stared at him. Lift the wagon? Alone? The thing had to weigh 1,000 pounds, loaded, more. He'd kill himself trying, and she'd die anyway, and they'd find 2 bodies in spring instead of 1. "I need you to understand," he repeated more forcefully. "Blink once if you understand." She blinked. What else could she do? "Good." He stood, moved away again. She heard him testing the wagon, felt it shift slightly. More ice showered down from the undercarriage. "On 3, he called out. 1. This was insane. Impossible. 2. She was hallucinating. Had to be. The mind inventing impossible rescue in the final moments. 3. The wagon exploded upward with a grinding shriek of wood and metal. Light flooded her vision. The crushing weight vanished from her chest. Air rushed into her lungs. Actual air, full breaths, even though each one felt like being stabbed. Rhea gasped, coughed, and blood sprayed from her lips. But she was breathing. Actually breathing. Through her blurred vision, she could see him, the stranger, standing where the wagon had been, arms extended upward, holding the entire weight of the wreck above his head. His face was contorted with effort, veins standing out on his neck, muscles trembling with strain. But he held it. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. No human could— "Move!" he ground out through clenched teeth. Rhea tried. Her body wouldn't respond. Everything below her chest was numb, disconnected, broken. "Move!" More urgent now. His arms were shaking violently. He couldn't hold it much longer. Terror overrode pain. Rhea dragged her working arm forward, clawed at the snow, pulled. Nothing happened. She tried again, put everything she had into it, and felt her body shift maybe an inch. Not enough. Not nearly enough. The stranger made a decision. In one explosive movement, he hurled the wagon aside completely, actually threw it, sent 1,000 pounds of wood and metal tumbling down the slope where it crashed against an outcropping with a sound like the world breaking. Then he was kneeling beside her again, hands moving over her body with quick, practiced efficiency. Multiple rib fractures, left side. Crushed pelvis, likely. Left shoulders dislocated or fractured, hard to tell. Bleeding from somewhere internal, possible spinal involvement. He was talking to himself more than her, cataloging her damage with clinical detachment. "Am I dying?" Rhea whispered. Her voice sounded wrong, wet and bubbling. His pale eyes met hers. "Not today." "You can't—" She coughed, tasted more blood. "Can't carry me. Too far. Too heavy." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "I just lifted a loaded freight wagon off you. I think I can manage." Before she could protest further, he was moving. He pulled off his coat, heavy wool lined with fur, and laid it on the snow. Then, with movements that were somehow both gentle and brutally efficient, he rolled her onto it. The pain was transcendent, whiting out her vision, but she didn't scream. Couldn't scream. Her broken ribs wouldn't allow it. He wrapped the coat around her like a cocoon, then lifted the whole bundle, coat and woman together, and settled her against his chest. "This is going to hurt," he said. "It already hurts. It's going to hurt worse." He started walking. He was right. It hurt worse. Every step sent shockwaves through her broken body. Every adjustment of his grip ground bone against bone. Rhea bit down on her lip until blood flowed, trying not to scream, trying not to beg him to stop, trying not to die. The world became pain and motion, motion and pain. She was only dimly aware of the landscape passing around them. Trees appearing like ghosts through the snow, rocks looming and receding, the slope changing from steep to gradual to steep again. Time lost meaning. Minutes could have been hours. Hours could have been minutes. The stranger never stopped, never slowed. He walked with the steady, relentless pace of someone accustomed to harsh terrain and heavy burdens. His breathing never grew ragged. His grip never loosened. "Who are you?" Rhea managed to ask during one brief moment of clarity. "Rowan Voss." "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. They crested a rise and began descending into a narrow valley. "Because you were there," he said finally. It wasn't an answer that made sense. People didn't risk their lives for strangers who were there. People looked away, made excuses, protected themselves. That was how the world worked, how it had always worked. "You should have left me." "Probably." "I'm nobody. Nothing." His arms tightened fractionally around her. "Everyone says that. Most people are wrong." Rhea wanted to argue, but darkness was creeping back into her vision. The brief surge of adrenaline that had sustained her was fading. Her body was shutting down, conserving resources for basic survival, abandoning everything else. "Stay awake," Rowan said sharply. "Tired." "I know. Stay awake anyway." "Why does it matter?" "Because if you fall unconscious now, you might not wake up. And I didn't lift a goddamn freight wagon off you just to have you die on me from shock." There was something in his voice, not quite anger, not quite fear, but something fierce and uncompromising that grabbed her attention. He cared whether she lived. This stranger who owed her nothing, knew nothing about her, had decided her life mattered. It was so foreign a concept that it almost didn't register. "Talk to me," Rowan commanded. "Tell me your name." "Rhea." Rhea Calder. "Where are you from?" Rhea Calder. "Nowhere. Millridge, I guess, for now." "Family?" "No." "Friends?" A bitter laugh bubbled up, came out as a wet cough. "No." He was quiet for a moment, navigating around a fallen tree. "Then we have that in common." They walked in silence after that. The snow was lessening, the storm's fury diminishing to a steady fall. Through gaps in the clouds, Rhea could see the light changing, afternoon sliding toward evening. How long had it been since the wagon fell? An hour? 3? Forever? "Almost there," Rowan said. Rhea hadn't realized she'd spoken aloud. Or maybe she hadn't. Maybe he just knew what she needed to hear. A structure emerged from the white. A cabin, small and solid, built from dark timber and stone. Smoke rose from a chimney, light glowed in a window. It looked like something from a story, the kind of place where lost travelers found shelter and unexpected magic. Rhea had stopped believing in stories a long time ago. Rowan kicked the door open and carried her inside. Warmth hit like a physical force after so long in the cold. The cabin was a single large room, Spartan but functional. A fireplace dominated one wall, a bed another. Shelves lined the remaining walls, crammed with books and jars and equipment that looked medical. He laid her on a table near the fire, a sturdy work surface that looked accustomed to hard use. "I'm going to examine you properly now," he said. "It's going to hurt worse than the walk." "How is that possible?" "You'll see." He was right. Again. The examination was systematic and merciless. Rowan cut away her clothing with shears, exposing her broken body to the firelight. His hands moved over her with impersonal efficiency, pressing, testing, cataloging damage. When he manipulated her dislocated shoulder, Rhea did scream, a raw animal sound that she barely recognized as her own. "3 ribs broken, 2 cracked," he said, talking to himself again. "Shoulder dislocated but not fractured. Pelvis is cracked but not shattered. Internal bleeding, yes, but not catastrophic. No spinal damage that I can detect. You're lucky." "Lucky," Rhea repeated faintly. "You survived. That's lucky." He moved away, began pulling supplies from shelves and cabinets. Glass bottles, metal instruments, clean cloth. He worked with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Are you a doctor?" Rhea asked. "Was, long time ago." "Why aren't you anymore?" His hands paused for just a moment. "I made a choice." It wasn't an answer, but the tone suggested it was the only one she'd get. Rowan returned to the table with his arms full of supplies. "I'm going to set your shoulder first, then bind your ribs. After that, I'll clean and dress your external wounds. Then we wait and see if the internal bleeding stops on its own. And if it doesn't, then we deal with that when it happens." He didn't say, "if you survive that long," but she heard it anyway. The shoulder reduction was agony. Rowan braced her against the table with one hand and pulled with the other, and something deep in her joint popped with a sound like green wood breaking. Rhea's vision went white, then black, then white again. When it cleared, tears were streaming down her face. "Worst part's over," Rowan said. A lie, probably, but a kind one. He worked in focused silence after that, binding her ribs with strips of clean cloth, tight enough to support, but not so tight she couldn't breathe. Each wrap was precise, professional. His hands were steady and sure. The hands of someone who'd held together many broken things. The external wounds, deep gashes on her arm and leg where metal had torn through, he cleaned with something that burned like liquid fire, then stitched with black thread and a curved needle. Rhea watched the needle dip in and out of her skin with distant fascination. It hurt, but in a small, manageable way compared to everything else. "You're good at this," she said. "Practice." His voice was neutral, but something flickered in his expression. Memory, maybe. Or regret. When he finally finished, Rhea looked like she'd been mummified. Bandages covered most of her torso, her left arm was bound against her chest, and her leg wore a neat line of stitches that looked disturbingly professional. Rowan lifted her again, carefully this time, mindful of the fresh wrappings, and carried her to the bed. It was narrow but clean, the blanket's rough wool that smelled of pine and wood smoke. He settled her onto the mattress with unexpected gentleness, then pulled the blankets up to her chin. "Sleep," he said. "The internal bleeding. Nothing you can do about it now. Either it stops or it doesn't. Rest will help. If I fall asleep, I might not wake up." "Yes." His honesty was somehow more comforting than false reassurance. Rhea studied his face in the firelight. Up close, away from the storm and the immediate crisis, she could see him more clearly. 50, maybe, or a hard 40. His hair was dark but threaded with gray, pulled back in a rough queue. His beard was full and unkempt. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes carved by weather and time into something that might have been handsome once but was now just formidable. But those eyes. Pale gray, almost colorless in certain light, absolutely focused in all light. They saw everything, gave away nothing, and somehow made her feel less invisible than she'd felt in years. "Why did you save me?" Rhea asked again. Rowan stood, moved toward the fire. "Because I could." "That's not a reason." He was quiet for a long moment, his back to her, silhouetted against the flames. "Maybe it's the only reason that matters." Rhea wanted to push, to understand, but exhaustion was pulling her under like deep water. Her eyes grew heavy despite her fear. The warmth, the bed, the simple fact of being alive, it was all too much to resist. "If I die," she whispered, "thank you." She thought she heard him say something in response, but the words were lost as sleep claimed her. When Rhea woke, she knew immediately that something was wrong. The light was different, daylight instead of firelight, pale and thin. The pain was different too, still present but transformed, less sharp, more pervasive. Her mouth tasted like death and her throat was a desert. She tried to sit up and her body screamed in protest. Every muscle, every bone, every inch of skin announced its displeasure. She made it maybe 2 inches off the pillow before collapsing back with a gasp. "Don't!" Rowan's voice came from somewhere to her left. "You'll tear the stitches." Rhea turned her head, slowly, carefully, and found him sitting in a chair beside the bed. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders tight with fatigue. "How long?" she asked. 18 hours. "The bleeding?" "Stopped. Probably. You're still alive, so that's a good sign." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a wave of dizziness. Still alive. She'd actually survived. "You need water," Rowan said. He stood, crossed to a pitcher on the table, poured a cup. When he returned, he slid an arm behind her shoulders, carefully, mindful of her injuries, and lifted her just enough to drink. The water was cool and sweet, and the best thing Rhea had ever tasted. She drank greedily until Rowan pulled the cup away. "Slow," he said. "Too much too fast and you'll just vomit it back up." He lowered her back to the pillow and settled into the chair again. In the daylight, she could see the cabin more clearly. It was indeed a single room, maybe 20 feet square, but efficiently organized. The medical supplies took up one entire wall of shelving. Books filled another. The third wall held what looked like preserved plants and specimens in jars, medicinal herbs, maybe, or compounds for treatments. This wasn't just a cabin, it was a practice, a laboratory, a place where someone had built a new life from the pieces of an old one. You really were a doctor, Rhea said. I told you that. But not anymore. No. What happened? His face closed off completely. Nothing that concerns you. The words were harsh, but his tone was merely tired, not angry, just, I'd done with that particular conversation before it started. Rhea studied him. He'd saved her life, carried her miles through a blizzard, spent the night watching to make sure she kept breathing, and he clearly wanted nothing from her, not gratitude, not explanation, not company, just nothing. It was so different from every other interaction she'd had with men that she didn't quite know how to process it. How long until I can walk? She asked instead. Weeks, months maybe, depending on how the bones heal. The ribs will be 4 to 6 weeks minimum. The pelvis is harder to predict. Months. You were crushed by a freight wagon. Be grateful you'll walk at all. He was right, but the implication settled over her like a weight. Weeks here, bedridden, helpless, dependent. It was her worst nightmare made manifest. I can pay you, Rhea said. Not much, but I have some savings. Back in Millridge. When I can get to a bank, I don't want your money. Everyone wants money. I don't. Then what do you want? Rowan met her eyes directly. For you to heal and leave. In that order. The words should have stung. Should have confirmed every belief she'd ever held about her own worthlessness. But somehow they didn't. There was no cruelty in them, no malice, just honesty. He'd saved her because he could. Now he'd see her through recovery because he'd started it, and then they'd both move on with their lives. It was transactional, yes, but it was also clean. No hidden prices, no unspoken expectations, just cause and effect, action and consequence. Rhea found herself almost smiling. I can work with that. The days blurred together in a haze of pain, healing, and reluctant dependence. Rowan was a competent caretaker, but a taciturn companion. He checked her wounds twice daily, changed bandages, monitored for infection. He brought her food, simple, nourishing meals that tasted of herbs and game meat. He helped her with the humiliating necessities that came with being bedridden. He did all of it with clinical efficiency and absolutely no commentary. They barely spoke beyond what was necessary. Rhea told herself she preferred it that way. She'd never been comfortable with small talk anyway, and Rowan clearly had no interest in getting to know her. They were temporary allies in the project of her survival, nothing more. But sometimes, in the long hours when he was elsewhere, hunting, gathering firewood, doing whatever he did outside the cabin, she found herself studying the space, trying to piece together who he was. The books were the most revealing. Medical texts, yes, but also philosophy, poetry, natural history, a complete works of Shakespeare, spine cracked from reading, collections of botanical illustrations, journals filled with detailed notes in cramped handwriting that she couldn't read from the bed but desperately wanted to. The man had been educated, thoroughly educated. This wasn't someone who'd stumbled into medicine by accident. This was someone who'd pursued it deliberately, passionately, and then walked away. Why? The question obsessed her during those first weeks. Not because she needed to know, it truly wasn't her business, but because the puzzle of it distracted from the constant low-grade agony of healing and the crushing boredom of being unable to move. On the 10th day, she asked, "You don't have to answer," Rhea said as Rowan changed her bandages. "But I'm going insane from boredom, and I need to think about something other than pain, so I'm asking, why did you leave medicine?" He didn't respond immediately, just continued his methodical work. She'd almost given up on an answer when he spoke. "I made a choice between what I was supposed to do and what I thought was right. Turns out the medical establishment values obedience more than righteousness. You were expelled. Essentially. For what? Treating people who couldn't pay, in ways the hospital board deemed inappropriate." His voice carried bitter amusement. Apparently saving lives is only noble when it's profitable. Rhea absorbed this. "So you came here." "So I came here." "And you've been alone since?" "Yes." "For how long?" 8 years. 8 years. Alone in this cabin, practicing medicine on no one, speaking to no one, living a half-life of solitude and books. It sounded like prison. Or penance. Do you miss it? Rhea asked. The medicine? Rowan's hands paused. Every day. Then why? Because going back would require admitting they were right and I was wrong. And I wasn't wrong. The words came out hard, final. Conversation over. But Rhea had heard what mattered, the pain underneath. This wasn't a man who'd chosen solitude. This was a man who'd been forced into it and made the best of bad options. Just like her. They were more alike than she'd thought. Recovery was brutally slow. Week 2 brought the ability to sit up unassisted. Week 3, she could stand for brief periods, though her pelvis screamed protest and her legs shook with the effort. Week 4, she managed 3 steps from the bed to the chair before nearly collapsing. Through it all, Rowan was patient but distant. He showed her exercises to rebuild strength, corrected her form, provided steady support when she wobbled. But he never offered unnecessary comfort, never suggested this was anything other than what it was, medical necessity. Rhea found herself oddly grateful for it. She'd had pity before, and it was worse than contempt. Rowan's clinical detachment was almost respectful in its honesty. He treated her like a person with a problem to solve, not a victim to manage. By week 5, she could walk the length of the cabin and back. By week 6, she could dress herself, cook simple meals, and contribute something other than frustration to the household. That was when she made her first mistake. I should send word to Millridge, Rhea said one evening as they ate dinner in companionable silence. Let the company know I'm alive. They might think I stole the cargo. Rowan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The cargo? From the wagon. It was valuable. Gold coins, actually, being transferred between banks. If they think I took it, did you take it? Of course not. It went over the cliff with the wagon. Then there's no problem. There might be. If they can't find the wagon, can't verify the gold was lost. She trailed off, seeing his expression change. What? The wagon broke apart in the fall. The cargo would have scattered. If someone came looking and found gold missing from where it should be, and no body to prove the driver died. He set down his fork. They might assume theft. But I didn't. Doesn't matter what you did. Matters what they can prove. Ice slid down Rhea's spine. They'd need evidence. They'd need suspicion and a convenient target. You're both. He wasn't wrong. She was nobody, nothing, exactly the kind of person who could be accused without consequences. Who would believe her denial? Who would even care to investigate? So what do I do? Rhea asked. Rowan stood, walked to the window, stared out at the darkening forest. Stay here until spring. By then the snow will melt. They'll find the wagon, verify the loss. Your name will be clear. That's months away. Yes. I can't stay here for months. I'm already... She stopped herself. Already what? An imposition, a burden, unwanted. All the things she'd always been. But when she looked at Rowan's reflection in the dark window, she didn't see annoyance or resentment. She saw only that same distant thoughtfulness, the expression of someone solving a problem. You can stay, he said quietly, until it's safe. Why would you do that? He turned to face her, those pale gray eyes unreadable in the firelight. Because I can. That answer again. The one that didn't make sense and yet somehow made perfect sense. Rhea nodded slowly. Okay, until spring. Neither of them could have known that spring would bring far more than melting snow and clear roads. It would bring armed men, impossible choices, and a reckoning neither of them was prepared for. But that night, in the warm cabin with the fire burning low and the forest silent beyond the walls, they were just two people who'd found temporary shelter in each other's existence. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. Winter deepened around the cabin like a closing fist. The snow that had seemed merely oppressive in those first weeks transformed into something absolute. Drifts climbed the walls until the windows became tunnels of light carved through white. The forest disappeared beneath a blanket so thick and uniform that the world beyond the clearing ceased to exist in any meaningful way. They were alone, truly, completely alone, in a pocket of warmth surrounded by hostile wilderness. Rhea discovered she didn't mind as much as she'd expected. The rhythm of survival was simple, honest. Wake at dawn when Rowan stoked the fire. Eat breakfast, usually porridge with dried berries or nuts. Then the work began. Rhea's work was healing, rebuilding strength through the exercises Rowan prescribed with clinical precision. His work was everything else: hunting, gathering wood, maintaining their shelter against the relentless cold, preparing remedies from his store of dried herbs. They moved around each other with increasing efficiency, learning the small courtesies of shared space. Rhea knew to stay clear when he was working with his medical instruments, knew the particular silence that meant he was deep in thought and not to be disturbed. Rowan learned she preferred her tea black, that she woke from nightmares sometimes, but never wanted to talk about them, that she could skin a rabbit with surprising competence if he brought the carcass inside. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked the first time, watching her work with the small knife he'd provided. "Workhouse. They had us prepare kitchen animals sometimes. Said it built character." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, separating hide from flesh in smooth pulls. "Really, it just saved them money on butchers." Rowan grunted, something that might have been approval or just acknowledgement. He'd taken the rabbit when she finished, and later they'd eaten it stewed with root vegetables. He'd never asked her to help with that particular task again, but he'd also never commented when she did it anyway. Small offerings, small acceptances, the careful construction of coexistence. By the 8th week, Rhea could walk without significant pain. By the 9th, she could manage the trip to the woodpile and back without her pelvis screaming protest. Week 10 brought a milestone. She climbed the ladder to the cabin's small loft, where Rowan stored additional supplies, retrieved a jar of preserved plums, and descended without incident. Rowan had watched the entire operation from his chair by the fire, his expression unreadable. "Pelvis has healed well," he said when she reached the floor. "Better than I expected, honestly. You must have good bones." My mother used to say that. "Good sturdy stock," she'd say, like we were horses. Rhea settled into the opposite chair, offering him the jar. "Thought we could use something sweet." He took it, pried it open with practiced hands, and passed it back. "Your mother. You said fever took her?" It was the first personal question he'd asked in weeks. Rhea studied him, trying to understand what had changed, what had prompted this crack in his careful distance. But his face gave nothing away, as always. "Both parents. I was 8. They went within 3 days of each other." She took one of the preserved plums, the sweetness almost shocking after weeks of plain food. "The neighbors said they'd care for me. They lied. People do." "Yes." She watched the fire, memory pulling her back to those early days of loss and confusion. "The workhouse taught me quick that nobody was coming, that I was on my own and better accept it fast." "How old when you left?" 16. "They age you out, wash their hands of you, send you into the world with 3 coins and a prayer you don't come back." "And you never did?" "Never did." Another plum. This one somehow sadder than the first. "Spent the next 10 years proving I could survive without them. Without anyone." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled, a log settling with a soft crash of embers. Outside, wind howled through the trees. Not the screaming fury of a blizzard, just the constant low moan of winter asserting its dominance. "I was 23 when I finished medical school," Rowan said finally. "Top of my class, had offers from 3 hospitals, all prestigious. Chose the biggest, the most respected. Thought I was going to change the world." Rhea waited. She'd learned that Rowan's silences meant he was deciding whether to continue, and interrupting would close the door completely. "Took me 5 years to realize the hospital didn't care about healing. They cared about profit, about reputation, about keeping the right people happy." His voice was flat, but something moved beneath it. Old anger, old pain. "The charity ward was a joke. We'd stabilize people just enough to discharge them, knowing they'd be back in a week because they couldn't afford medicine or proper care. Meanwhile, the private suites upstairs had marble floors and dedicated nurses." "You said something about treating people who couldn't pay." "I started bringing medicine home. Nothing expensive, just basics. Antibiotics, pain management, wound supplies. I'd treat people in my apartment after hours. Workers, prostitutes, anyone who couldn't afford the hospital's fees." "That doesn't sound worth expulsion." Rowan's laugh was bitter. It wasn't. That they might have tolerated as eccentric charity. What they couldn't tolerate was me testifying against one of their major donors in a malpractice case. Rhea sat forward. What happened? Wealthy man's daughter died from complications after surgery. Routine procedure, should have been simple. But the surgeon was drunk. Everyone knew it, had known it for months, and he nicked an artery. By the time anyone realized, she'd bled out internally. His hands tightened on the arms of his chair. The hospital covered it up, blamed post-operative infection, paid the family a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement, transferred the surgeon to another hospital with a glowing recommendation. But you told the truth. Her brother came to me begging for answers. I gave them to him. He filed a lawsuit. I testified. Rowan's voice went very quiet. The hospital gave me a choice: recant my testimony and keep my position, or stand by what I'd said and lose everything. You chose the truth. I chose the truth. They destroyed me for it. Blacklisted me from every hospital in 3 states, revoked my privileges, spread rumors I was mentally unstable. Within 6 months, I couldn't get hired to clean bedpans. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. So I came here, built this cabin, live off the land and what knowledge I kept when they stripped everything else away. The story settled between them like snow accumulating on branches, heavy, inevitable, transformative. Rhea understood now the bitterness in his voice when he talked about medical establishments, the way he attacked problems with such fierce precision. He'd been broken by people who were supposed to value the same things he did, betrayed by a system he'd devoted his life to serving, just like she'd been betrayed by every person and institution that had promised to care. We're both exiles, Rhea said softly. We are. Do you regret it? The testimony? Rowan met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something other than distant courtesy in them. She saw conviction, absolute and unshakable. Not for a single second. Something warm bloomed in Rhea's chest. Not attraction, though Rowan was striking in his austere way, but recognition. She was looking at someone who'd made the same choice she would have made, consequences be damned. Someone who'd chosen dignity over safety. Someone who understood. Thank you, she said, for telling me. He nodded, a small movement that acknowledged both her gratitude and the significance of what he'd shared. Then he stood, the moment closing as deliberately as it had opened. It's late. You should rest. Will you tell me more sometime about the hospital? Rowan paused halfway to the kitchen area. Maybe, if you tell me why you were driving that wagon alone in a storm. Deal. That night, Rhea lay in the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling beams, listening to Rowan move through his evening routine. The soft sounds of dishes being cleaned, the fire being banked, his footsteps crossing to the loft where he'd taken to sleeping once she could navigate the ladder. For the first time since the accident, maybe for the first time in years, Rhea felt something other than alone. The feeling terrified her almost as much as it comforted her. The next morning brought a change in weather and everything else. Rhea woke to sunlight, actual brilliant sunlight streaming through the windows instead of the perpetual gray that had dominated for weeks. The storm had broken. Beyond the glass, the world glittered like something from a fairy tale. Every surface coated in ice that caught and fractured the light into a million dancing rainbows. It was beautiful. It was also a timer starting to count down. When the weather clears, the pass will be accessible again, Rowan said over breakfast. He'd been watching her study the sunshine with an expression she couldn't quite read. People will start moving supplies, checking the routes. They might find the wagon. And if they do? Depends what they find with it. If the gold's scattered, if most of it's still there, your story holds. If it's gone... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Rhea set down her spoon, appetite vanished. She'd been living in a bubble for weeks, focused on healing, on the simple rhythm of survival. The outside world had seemed distant, almost theoretical, but it was coming back whether she was ready or not. How long do I have? Week, maybe 2, before the main road's clear enough for regular traffic. Another week or 2 after that before anyone bothers with the pass where you went over. Spring mud will slow them down. So a month, maybe. Maybe. Rhea stood, walked to the window, pressed her palm against the cold glass. Out there, Beyond the glittering beauty, her old life waited. Her accusations, her poverty, her invisibility. Everything she'd briefly escaped in this pocket of isolation and grudging companionship. "I don't want to go back," she said quietly. "Then don't." She turned. Rowan was watching her with those pale, penetrating eyes. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I have nothing. No money, no prospects, no skills anyone values. If I run, I'll just end up in another mill ridge, another warehouse, another—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Another wagon headed over a cliff," Rowan finished. "Yes." He stood, crossed to stand beside her at the window. For a long moment, they both stared out at the transformed landscape. "You have medical knowledge now," he said finally. "Basic field medicine, wound care, fracture management. You learned it by necessity, but you learned it well. That's not enough to— You can hunt, track, survive in wilderness. You're strong enough to split wood, haul water, prepare game." He glanced at her. "You think those aren't valuable skills?" "Not for a woman alone. Maybe not in Millridge, but there are other places. Frontier settlements, mining camps, places desperate for anyone with useful abilities and willing to overlook gender if you can do the work." Rhea stared at him. "You're saying I should run." "I'm saying you should choose, deliberately. Go back and face whatever's waiting, or go forward and build something new. But don't drift. Don't just let things happen to you." "I've been letting things happen to me my whole life." "I know. I can see it." His voice gentled slightly. "That's why I'm telling you, choose." The word hung between them, weighted with possibility and terror. Choose. When had Rhea ever chosen anything? She'd reacted, survived, endured. But chosen? Deliberately decided her own path rather than taking whatever was offered or forced upon her? Never. The idea was intoxicating and paralyzing in equal measure. "What if I choose wrong?" she asked. "Then you'll deal with the consequences and choose again. That's how it works." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Not easy, but simple." Rhea turned that over in her mind, testing it for truth. Simple but not easy. Yes, that felt right. Choosing to testify had been simple for Rowan. The right thing was obvious, but the consequences had been brutal. He'd paid for that choice with everything he'd built, and he'd do it again. Could she do the same? "I need to think," Rhea said. "Take your time. You have a month." Maybe. The days that followed were strange, suspended between winter and spring, between one life and another. The weather stayed clear but cold, the sun brilliant but distant. Rhea threw herself into work, anything to occupy her hands and silence the constant churning of her thoughts. She helped Rowan process a deer he'd brought down, learning to butcher properly, to separate cuts, to render fat for candles and soap. She organized his medical supplies, creating a system that made sense, that let him find what he needed quickly. She repaired her own clothes and then started on his, mending tears and replacing buttons with neat, precise stitches. Rowan watched these activities with something that might have been approval. He also began teaching her more deliberately, not just first aid, but actual medicine. How to diagnose common ailments, mix remedies, set broken bones. He'd lecture while they worked, testing her retention with quick questions that she learned to answer automatically. "Why do you splint above and below the fracture?" "To immobilize the joints and prevent movement at the break site." "How do you identify internal bleeding?" "Rapid pulse, pale skin, distended abdomen, confusion, blood in vomit or stool." "Treatment for shock." "Elevate feet, maintain body temperature, monitor breathing, reassure the patient." "Good. Again." It was like being back in the workhouse lessons, but better. Rowan never mocked her for not knowing something, never made her feel stupid for asking questions. He just answered, explained, and moved on. Learning became pleasure instead of survival. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the weather cleared, they were working through a complicated lesson on herbal antibiotics when Rowan stopped mid-sentence. "Someone's coming." Rhea's head snapped up. "What?" "Listen." She did. At first there was nothing, just the usual forest sounds, wind through branches, the occasional bird. Then she caught it, voices. Multiple voices, still distant but growing closer. Terror spiked through her chest. They found the wagon. We don't know that. But Rowan was already moving, checking the window, his body tense in a way she'd never seen before. Could be trappers, traders, anyone. In this season? This far up? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. The voices grew louder. Rhea could make out individual words now, though not their meaning. 3 men at least, maybe 4, moving purposefully toward the cabin. Rowan crossed to a cabinet, pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. When he unwrapped it, Rhea saw a pistol, old but well-maintained. You have a gun. Yes. You never mentioned. Didn't seem relevant. He checked the load with practiced efficiency. Stay back from the windows. Let me talk to them first. Rowan, stay back. His tone left no room for argument. Rhea pressed herself against the wall beside the fireplace, heart hammering, mind racing through possibilities. They'd found the wagon, found the gold was missing, tracked her here. They'd come to drag her back, to accuse her, to... A loud knock shook the door. Hello, the cabin. A man's voice, rough and carrying. We're looking for someone. Need to talk. Rowan moved to the door but didn't open it. State your business. Name's Marshall Cormack. Got some questions about a missing freight wagon, missing driver, missing cargo. Heard there might be someone up here who knows something about it. Rhea's blood turned to ice. A marshal. They'd sent a marshal. Who told you that? Rowan asked. Traders passed through Millridge a couple weeks back, said they'd seen smoke from this area, knew someone lived out here. When the company realized their wagon never arrived and their driver disappeared, they started asking questions. Your name came up. My name? Dr. Rowan Voss. Used to practice down south before you relocated. People remember you. Remember you had a reputation for helping folks who couldn't help themselves. Clever, Rhea thought through her panic. They weren't accusing Rowan of anything, just suggesting he might have helped someone. Someone like a driver who'd stolen gold and needed to hide. I'm opening the door, Rowan said. I'm armed and I'd prefer to keep this civil. Understood. We're not here for trouble. Rowan opened the door slowly. 3 men stood in the snow, one in a marshal's badge, the other 2 in the rough clothes of hired muscle. The marshal was maybe 40, weathered and competent looking. The muscle was younger, eager, the type who'd enjoy making arrests. The marshal's eyes went immediately to Rhea, pressed against the wall beside the fireplace. There she is, he said, not unkindly. You must be Rhea Calder. Rhea said nothing. Her throat had closed completely. Miss Calder, I need you to come with us back to Millridge. The merchant company has filed charges. They're saying you stole 2,000 in gold coins and staged the wagon accident to cover it. That's a lie. The words came out stronger than she'd expected. The wagon went over in the storm. I nearly died. Can you prove that? Her injuries prove it, Rowan said sharply. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, extensive trauma. No one stages that. Or she got injured during the theft and cover-up. The marshal's tone remained conversational, but his eyes were hard. I'm not saying I believe them, Miss Calder. I'm saying they've made the accusation, and it needs to be answered, officially. The gold went over the cliff with the wagon, Rhea said. It's still there. Search the site. We did. Found the wagon, what was left of it. Found some gold. About 200 worth. The marshal paused. The rest is missing. The world tilted. That's not possible. Nevertheless, you see our problem. Someone else took it, Rhea said desperately. After the accident, someone found the wreck and, in that storm, with the pass blocked? One of the muscle men shook his head. Not likely. Rowan stepped between Rhea and the door, his pistol held loosely but obviously. You have accusations, not evidence. We have missing gold and a missing driver who turns up in the cabin of a man known for harboring fugitives. I've never harbored anyone. No? What do you call this? Saving a life. The courts can decide that. The marshal's voice hardened slightly. Miss Calder, I need you to come with us. Now. We can do this peaceful or difficult, but we're not leaving without you. Rhea looked at Rowan. His face was stone, but she could see the calculation behind his eyes. 3 men, all armed. If he fought, people would die. Maybe him. Maybe her. Definitely some of them. Don't, she said quietly. It's not worth it. Rhea, I'll go. I'll face this. She stepped away from the wall, forcing her voice steady even as her hands shook. I didn't steal anything. The truth will prove that. Truth doesn't always matter, Rowan said, his voice low and urgent. You know that as well as I do. She did. But what choice did she have? Run? Spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, never settling, never building anything? Or fight? For the first time in her life, Rhea chose to fight. I'm coming, she told the marshal. But I'm walking out of here on my own feet, and I'm denying everything you've accused me of. Something flickered in the marshal's expression, respect maybe, or surprise. Fair enough, get your things. Rhea had almost nothing. The clothes Rowan had provided to replace her ruined ones, the medical knowledge in her head, the strength she'd rebuilt over months of painful recovery, and the memory of what Rowan had said, choose. She was choosing. As she walked toward the door, Rowan caught her arm. I'm coming with you. You can't. I'm a witness to your condition when I found you. I can testify to the severity of your injuries, to the timeline. That matters. It'll destroy you. Going back, facing those people, I've already been destroyed. They can't do it twice. His eyes held hers, and Rhea saw the truth there. He wasn't doing this for justice or righteousness or any noble principle. He was doing it because somewhere in the last 3 months, she'd become more than a patient, more than an obligation. She'd become someone who mattered. The realization stole her breath. All right, she said quietly. Together then. Rowan nodded. He grabbed his coat, his medical bag, and led her out into the brilliant sunshine. The trip down the mountain was nothing like the desperate journey up. They moved slowly, carefully. The marshal and his men treating Rhea more like a person than a prisoner. No shackles, no rough handling. Just a steady march through melting snow and mud, down toward a world that had already decided her guilt. Rowan walked beside her the entire way, close enough that their shoulders brushed with each step. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said, but as they descended toward Millridge, toward judgment and accusation, and a fight Rhea had never chosen before now, she felt something she'd never expected. She wasn't alone. Whatever came next, however this ended, she would face it with someone who saw her, who believed her, who'd chosen to stand beside her even when walking away would have been easier. That was worth more than gold. That was worth everything. The sun climbed higher as they walked, melting ice into streams that carved new paths through old snow. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller, a dark speck against white wilderness. Ahead, the town waited with its questions and accusations and the machinery of judgment that ground the powerless into dust. Rhea squared her shoulders and kept walking. She'd spent her whole life being crushed by systems designed to break people like her. This time, she'd break back. Millridge hadn't changed in the months since Rhea had left it behind, but somehow it felt smaller now. The main street that had once seemed endless narrowed to a muddy corridor between buildings that leaned like tired old men. The people who stopped to stare as the marshal's party passed wore the same expression she remembered. Curious, judgmental, already convinced of whatever story suited them best. Rhea kept her eyes forward and her spine straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. The marshal led them to a 2-story building near the town center, the magistrate's office, courthouse, and jail all rolled into one structure that smelled of old paper and older injustice. Inside, a clerk looked up from his ledger, took in Rhea's appearance with a single dismissive glance, and returned to his work as though she'd already been tried and forgotten. Wait here, Marshal Cormac said, gesturing to a bench against the wall. I need to speak with Magistrate Holloway. Let him know we've brought her in. When's the hearing? Rowan asked. Tomorrow, probably. Maybe the day after. Depends on the magistrate's schedule and whether the company sends their representative up from the capital. She should have counsel. The marshal's expression flickered with something that might have been pity. She's welcome to hire someone if she can afford it. Rhea almost laughed. Afford counsel. She couldn't afford bread. Everything she'd owned had gone over the cliff with the wagon, and the pittance she'd saved had been in a boarding house room that had certainly been rented to someone else by now. I'll represent myself, she said. That's not wise, the marshal said, not unkindly. Neither is starving, but I've managed that too. One of the muscle men snorted. The marshal silenced him with a look, then disappeared up the stairs. His companions positioned themselves near the door. Not quite guards, but not quite allowing freedom either. Rowan sat beside Rhea on the bench, close enough that their arms touched. The contact was steadying, a reminder that at least one person in this building didn't believe the worst of her. "What's your strategy?" he asked quietly. "Tell the truth. Hope it matters." "It won't be enough. Not against a company with money and reputation to protect." "Then what do you suggest?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, his pale eyes tracking the room, cataloging exits and obstacles and possibilities. "We need to make them prove their case instead of making you disprove theirs. Shift the burden. Make them show how you could have physically stolen the gold, hidden it, and staged an accident that nearly killed you." "I don't know how to do that." "I do. I've testified in court before." His voice went hard. "I know how to make people uncomfortable with their assumptions. This isn't a malpractice case. No, it's worse, but the principle is the same. Make them work for their conclusion. Don't let them take the easy path of blaming the powerless." Rhea turned that over, testing it for weakness. It felt right, but also terrifying. Fighting back meant making herself visible, demanding to be heard. Everything in her wanted to make herself small, to apologize for existing, to accept whatever judgment fell. But that Rhea had died under a wagon on a frozen mountain pass. The woman who'd clawed her way back from that death was different, harder, less willing to surrender. "All right," she said. "Teach me." They spent the next hour huddled on that bench while Rowan outlined strategy in low, urgent tones. How to answer questions directly without volunteering information. How to redirect accusations back to their source. How to use precise language that couldn't be twisted. How to maintain composure even when the questions were designed to provoke. "They'll try to make you emotional," Rowan said, "angry or scared or desperate. Emotional testimony is easier to dismiss as unreliable. Stay cold, clinical. Answer only what's asked." "I'm not good at cold." "You're better than you think. You survived 3 months in isolation with a man you didn't know. You rebuilt yourself from broken. You walked down this mountain knowing what waited. That's not warmth. That's steel." The word settled into Rhea's chest, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Steel. Maybe she was. Maybe that was what the mountain had forged from the raw material of her survival. Footsteps on the stairs pulled them from their planning. The marshal descended, followed by a thin man in expensive clothes that looked out of place in Milridge's rough practicality. The newcomer had the soft hands and softer belly of someone who'd never done hard labor, and his eyes moved over Rhea with the cold assessment of a man pricing livestock. "This is the accused?" he asked the marshal. Rhea called her, yes. "She looks healthy for someone who was supposedly crushed by a wagon." "She was crushed by a wagon," Rowan said, his voice sharp. "I treated her injuries personally. Multiple fractures, internal hemorrhaging, extensive. And you are Dr. Rowan Voss." Recognition flickered across the man's face, followed by something uglier. "Ah, yes, the disgraced physician. How convenient that you happened to be nearby when this woman had her accident." "Not convenient, coincidence. Or conspiracy." The man turned to the marshal. "I want her held until the hearing. No bail." "That's not—" Rhea started. "It's entirely within my authority," the man cut her off. "I'm Gerald Pritchard, legal representative for the Frontier Freight Company. Your employer, who you robbed." "Former employer," Rhea corrected, "and I didn't rob anyone." "The evidence suggests otherwise." Pritchard pulled a document from his jacket, handed it to the marshal. "Inventory from the wagon site. Significant shortage in the gold shipment. No other explanation except theft." "There are plenty of explanations," Rowan said. "The cargo could have scattered during the fall, been buried in snow, washed away by runoff. In the middle of winter? On a frozen mountain?" Pritchard's smile was thin and sharp. "Come now, doctor. You're asking us to believe quite a coincidence. I'm asking you to investigate rather than conclude." "We have investigated. We found a missing driver, missing gold, and a convenient refuge with a man known for, shall we say, unconventional sympathies." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait, point to Pritchard. Marshal Cormac looked uncomfortable, the document heavy in his hands. I can hold her for the hearing, but if there's no real evidence beyond the missing gold is the evidence, Marshall. 2,000 in coins doesn't simply vanish. Someone took it. She's the only person who had access and motive. What motive? Rhea demanded. I was making steady wages. I had no debts, no desperate need. You had nothing, Pritchard interrupted. No family, no prospects, no future, except more freight routes and more poverty. 2,000 in gold represents a lifetime of earnings for someone like you. That's motive enough. The casual cruelty in his voice, someone like you, ignited something in Rhea's chest. Not anger, something colder. The steel Rowan had named. Someone like me, she repeated softly. You mean someone expendable, someone easy to blame, someone no one will defend. I mean someone with means and opportunity to commit theft. Then prove it. Rhea stood, meeting Pritchard's eyes directly. Don't just wave inventory sheets and make accusations. Prove I took the gold. Prove I hid it somewhere. Prove I somehow staged an accident that broke my ribs, shattered my pelvis, and left me bleeding out in a snowbank. Prove it. Pritchard's expression flickered, surprised maybe that she was fighting back. That's what the hearing is for. No, the hearing is where you hope to steamroll an uneducated woman who doesn't know how to defend herself. But I'm not playing that game. Rhea's voice stayed level, clinical, exactly as Rowan had coached. You want a conviction? Work for it. Show your evidence. Explain your theory. Convince a magistrate that your story makes sense. Don't just rely on my poverty and your reputation. Silence filled the room. Even the muscle men by the door were staring now, attention caught by the unexpected resistance. Marshal Cormac looked like he was trying very hard not to smile. Pritchard recovered quickly, smoothing his expression back to practiced condescension. Quite a speech. Did the good doctor teach you that? I taught myself. Years of being dismissed tends to clarify things. Well, you'll have time to refine your defense. Marshal, secure her in a cell. The hearing is set for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. I'll have the company's full case prepared. He turned toward the door, paused. Oh, and Dr. Voss, if you're planning to testify on her behalf, you should know the company will be prepared to question your credibility, your history, your reasons for helping her, all of it. I'm aware, Rowan said evenly. Question whatever you like. The truth doesn't change. We'll see. Pritchard left, taking his expensive clothes and cheaper threats with him. The marshal watched him go with an expression Rhea couldn't quite read, then sighed heavily. Cell's upstairs, he said to Rhea. It's not terrible, as cells go. I'll bring you dinner later. Can Dr. Voss stay? For a bit. I can't let him overnight, but you can have an hour or so. Cormac's voice gentled slightly. For what it's worth, Miss Calder, I thought you handled that well. Pritchard's used to people folding, seemed thrown when you didn't. Does that help me? Probably not, but it was still good to see. Small comfort, but Rhea took it anyway. She followed the marshal up the narrow stairs, Rowan behind her, to a hallway containing 3 cells. Only one was occupied, a drunk sleeping off his choices in the corner. The marshal opened the middle cell, gestured Rhea inside. The space was perhaps 8 feet square, containing a narrow cot, a bucket, and nothing else. Gray light filtered through a window too high and small to offer any real view. It smelled of old fear and older desperation. Rhea had lived in worse. The workhouse dormitories had been twice as crowded and half as clean. At least here she was alone with her thoughts. I'll be downstairs if you need anything, Cormac said. He left the cell door open, a small kindness, and retreated, his footsteps fading down the stairs. Rowan entered the cell, tested the cot's stability, then sat. You did well down there. I said what you told me to say. No, you said what you needed to say. There's a difference. He gestured for her to sit beside him. How are you feeling? The walk down the mountain? The stress? Your injuries? I'm fine. Everything hurts, but nothing's broken again. That's not what I meant. Rhea understood. He was asking about the other kind of pain, the kind that came from being trapped and accused and facing down a system designed to devour people like her. She considered lying, maintaining the steel facade she'd built downstairs. But Rowan had earned honesty. I'm terrified, she admitted. Not of the cell or the hearing or even being convicted. I'm terrified that I'll fight as hard as I can, and it still won't matter. That truth and justice and all the things we pretend are real are just stories we tell to make powerlessness bearable. They are stories, Rowan said quietly. But sometimes stories become real because people insist on them hard enough. I lost everything insisting on a story about truth mattering more than money. I do it again. You know why? Why? Because the alternative is surrendering before the fight starts. Accepting that power always wins, that the system always grinds down the powerless. Maybe that's true. Probably it is. But I'd rather break fighting than survive on my knees. The words resonated in Ria's chest like a bell. She'd spent her whole life on her knees, literally in the workhouse, metaphorically everywhere else, accepting whatever was offered, swallowing whatever abuse came, grateful just to survive another day. Where had that gotten her? Broken under a wagon, bleeding out in snow, erased before she was even gone. I don't want to be on my knees anymore, Ria said. Then don't be. Even if I lose? Especially if you lose. Losing on your feet is worth more than winning on your knees. They sat in silence for a while, shoulders touching, the cell's gray light painting them both in shades of determination and defiance. Outside, Millridge conducted its daily business, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in its courthouse. People bought bread and gossiped and made plans that didn't include caring about a nobody accused of theft. Ria had been nobody her entire life. It was a role she knew intimately, had worn so long it felt like skin. But nobody was invisible, and invisible meant underestimated. Maybe that was an advantage. I need you to teach me everything you remember about legal proceedings, Ria said suddenly. Not just testimony, but structure. How arguments flow, what magistrates respond to. Everything. Rowan's expression sharpened with approval. You're planning something. I'm planning to fight smart instead of just fight hard. They expect me to be emotional and unprepared, so I'll be neither. Pritchard will come at you sideways, try to trap you with your own words. Then I'll give him words that can't be twisted. He'll question your character, drag up every hard moment of your life as evidence of desperation. Let him. I'm not ashamed of surviving. He'll make Rowan Voss helping you seem suspicious, suggest impropriety or conspiracy. Ria turned to look at him directly. Is there? Impropriety? No. No hesitation, no doubt. You're someone who needed help, and I was capable of providing it, that's all. Then that's what I'll say, simply, clearly, without apology. Something shifted in Rowan's expression, respect deepening into something else, something that made Ria's pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. But before she could name it, he looked away, returning to the careful distance they'd maintained for months. All right, he said, let's prepare. They spent the remaining hour dissecting legal strategy with the same precision Rowan had once used teaching her medicine. He described court procedures, explained burden of proof, outlined the difference between circumstantial and direct evidence. Ria absorbed it all with the fierce concentration of someone who understood this knowledge was armor. When Marshal Cormac finally returned to announce visiting hours were over, Ria felt marginally less terrified and significantly more prepared. I'll be back first thing tomorrow, Rowan said as he stood. Early. We can review before the hearing. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for what he'd given her. Not just knowledge, but belief that she was worth defending. For all of it. Rowan paused at the cell door, turned back. For a moment his careful control slipped and she saw what lay beneath. Fierce protectiveness, bone-deep anger at injustice, and something warmer that he quickly shuddered. Tomorrow we make them work for their accusations, he said. And we don't stop fighting until they give up or we win. What if neither happens? Then we appeal, and appeal again, and keep fighting until the system either acknowledges the truth or exhausts itself trying to bury it. His pale eyes held hers. I told you. I'm done being destroyed by people who pretend righteousness while serving profit. They don't get you too. Then he was gone. Footsteps receding down the stairs, leaving Ria alone in the cell with those words echoing in the silence. They don't get you too. As if she belonged to something other than herself. As if her survival mattered to more than just her. The idea was foreign, uncomfortable, precious beyond measure. Rhea lay on the narrow cot and stared at the ceiling, mind racing through everything Rowan had taught her, building and rebuilding her defense. She wouldn't sleep tonight. But that was fine. She'd spent years surviving on stubbornness and determination. One more night wouldn't break her. The cell's shadows deepened as evening bled into night. The drunk in the corner snored. The building settled with creaks and groans. Somewhere outside, Millridge closed its shops and dimmed its lamps and prepared for tomorrow, unconcerned with the fate of a nobody facing accusations she couldn't afford to fight. But Rhea Calder wasn't nobody anymore. She was someone who'd crawled back from death, someone who'd rebuilt herself from broken pieces, someone who'd finally learned to fight instead of just endure. Tomorrow they'd try to destroy her with law and procedure and the weight of institutional power. She'd make them earn every inch. Morning arrived gray and cold, winter not quite ready to surrender to spring. Rhea woke stiff and unrested, her body protesting the thin cot, and her mind already racing through the day ahead. Marshal Cormac brought her water and bread, his manner professionally distant but not unkind. "Hearing's at 9, he said. "I'll escort you down at 1:45. Dr. Voss is already here, waiting." "Can I see him?" "Not until after. Magistrate's rules, no contact with witnesses before proceedings." So she was alone for the final hour. Rhea used it to center herself, to rehearse answers, to build walls around her fear so it couldn't leak through and undermine her resolve. By the time Cormac returned to collect her, she'd transformed her terror into something sharper and more useful: cold, focused determination. The courtroom was the building's ground floor, rearranged. Chairs had been brought in, creating rows for spectators. A desk at the front served as the magistrate's bench. Tables on either side faced it, one for the prosecution, one for the defense. Rhea's table was empty except for a single chair. Pritchard's was crowded with papers, ledgers, and a younger man who looked like a clerk. The spectator seats were perhaps half full. Townspeople who'd come for entertainment, merchants with interest in the outcome. A few rough-looking men who Rhea pegged as company employees. Rowan sat in the front row, directly behind where she'd be seated. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded once, acknowledgement, support, belief. It would have to be enough. A door at the side opened and Magistrate Holloway entered. He was perhaps 60, with the weathered look of someone who'd lived hard before settling into comfortable authority. His robes were slightly shabby, his manner brisk and businesslike. He took a seat, surveyed the room, and rapped his gavel once. "Court is in session. Case of the Frontier Freight Company versus Rhea Calder, accused of theft and fraud." His voice carried easily through the small space. "Miss Calder, you stand accused of stealing approximately $1,800 in gold coins from a freight shipment under your care, and of staging a wagon accident to conceal said theft. How do you plead?" Rhea stood, kept her voice level. "Not guilty, Your Honor." "Do you have representation?" "I'm representing myself." Holloway's expression flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. "You understand you have the right to counsel." "I understand I can't afford counsel, Your Honor, so I'll speak for myself." A murmur rippled through the spectators. Holloway silenced it with a look. "Very well. Mr. Pritchard, present your case." Pritchard stood with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to winning. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward. The defendant was entrusted with a valuable shipment. That shipment never arrived. When the wagon was recovered, a significant portion of the gold was missing. The defendant is the only person who had access and opportunity. The conclusion is obvious." "Conclusions are what we're here to establish," Holloway said dryly. "Present your evidence." "Of course." Pritchard gestured to his clerk, who produced a ledger. "This is the company's inventory log showing the original shipment. $2,000 in gold coins, sealed and documented. When the wagon was recovered, only $200 remained. $1,800 vanished." "Where was the wagon recovered?" "At the base of a cliff on the mountain pass route. It had gone over the edge during a storm." "And the defendant?" "Found weeks later, alive and well, in the cabin of a known sympathizer to criminals and outcasts." Pritchard's tone made it sound damning. "Conveniently recovered from injuries she claims were catastrophic, living comfortably while the company suffered significant loss." Rhea's hands tightened on the table edge, but she forced herself to remain seated, silent. Her turn would come. Holloway studied the ledger, his expression unreadable. The gold was sealed, you said. Was the seal intact when you found the wagon? Pritchard hesitated. The seal was broken, but that could have occurred during the fall. Could have. Or during theft. Which is it, Mr. Pritchard? You can't have both. The evidence supports theft, Your Honor. Why else would the gold be missing? That's what we're here to determine. Holloway set the ledger aside. What other evidence do you have? Pritchard produced more documents. Route manifests, employment records, character statements from company officials describing Rhea as withdrawn and difficult, and the type to cause problems. Each piece was designed to paint a picture of someone desperate and morally flexible enough to steal. Rhea listened to her character being dismantled with clinical detachment. They weren't wrong about her withdrawal or difficulty. She had been those things. But they drew the wrong conclusions from them, saw criminality where there had been only survival. Finally, Pritchard called his first witness, Thomas Brennan, the company supervisor who'd originally hired Rhea and assigned her the fatal route. Brennan took the stand with obvious reluctance. He was a thick man with thinning hair and the perpetual squint of someone who spent too much time reading manifests in poor light. Mr. Brennan, Pritchard began smoothly, how long did Miss Calder work for your company? About 4 months before the incident. And what was her performance like? Adequate. She did her work, kept to herself mostly. Did she ever express dissatisfaction with her wages? Brennan shifted uncomfortably. Everyone complains about wages, Mr. Pritchard. It's the nature of the work. But did she specifically? Maybe once or twice. Nothing unusual. Did she volunteer for the Mountain Pass route, or was she assigned? Assigned. None of the regular drivers wanted it. Storm was coming in. Route was dangerous. So she took a route that experienced drivers refused. Why? She needed the work, I suppose. Didn't have the luxury of refusing. Pritchard smiled, sensing opportunity. Desperate, then. Would you say she was desperate? Objection, Rhea said suddenly, standing. The word felt foreign in her mouth, but she forced it out with confidence she didn't entirely feel. That calls for speculation about my mental state. Holloway looked at her with something that might have been approval. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Pritchard. Did Miss Calder appear to be under financial strain? She lived in a boarding house and worked constantly. Make of that what you will. Not quite the answer Pritchard wanted. He pressed harder. Did you trust her with valuable cargo? I trusted all my drivers with valuable cargo. That's the job. But you assigned her a dangerous route that others refused. Does that suggest trust or disposability? Brennan's face reddened. It suggests I had a delivery to make and she was willing. Or desperate enough. I didn't say that. But you implied it. No further questions. Holloway gestured to Rhea. Your witness, Miss Calder. Rhea stood, heart hammering but voice steady. She'd watched Pritchard's technique, leading questions, implications disguised as facts, relying on assumption rather than evidence. She could counter that. Rowan had taught her how. Mr. Brennan, she began, keeping her tone conversational, in your 4 months of employing me, did I ever steal anything? No. Did I ever behave dishonestly in any way? No. Did I ever give you reason to doubt my character? No, but just yes or no, please, did I? No. When you assigned me the Mountain Pass route, did you warn me about the storm? Brennan's expression grew more uncomfortable. I mentioned the weather was turning. Did you tell me the route was considered dangerous enough that experienced drivers refused it? I may not have emphasized that. Did you offer me any alternative? There wasn't one. The delivery had to be made. So it wasn't that I volunteered for danger. It was that danger was the only option I had. I suppose that's one way to look at it. Is there another way? An honest way? Pritchard shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative. Sustained, Holloway said, but his eyes on Rhea held interest. Stick to questions, Miss Calder. Yes, Your Honor. Rhea paused, recalibrating. Mr. Brennan, when the wagon didn't arrive and you learned I was missing, what did you assume happened? I assumed the worst, that you'd been caught in the storm, maybe gone over the cliff. You assumed I was dead. Yes. Because the route was that dangerous. Yes. So dangerous that death was the logical conclusion when I disappeared. Not theft. Death. Brennan nodded slowly. Yes, that's what I thought. Thank you. No further questions. Rhea sat, pulse racing. Pritchard looked annoyed. Holloway made a note. Small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The prosecution called 2 more witnesses, company officials who testified to the value of the lost gold and the damage to the company's reputation. Neither had met Rhea or knew anything about her directly. Their testimony was dry, financial, easily dismantled on cross-examination by simply asking if they had any evidence she'd taken the gold. They didn't. Then Pritchard called his final witness, and Rhea's stomach dropped. The prosecution calls Dr. Rowan Voss. Rowan rose from his seat with the same controlled calm he brought to everything, but Rhea saw the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes. He'd known this was coming. Pritchard had promised as much yesterday, but knowing and experiencing were different things. He took the stand and faced the room with steady composure. The magistrate administered the oath, and Rowan's voice didn't waver as he swore to tell the truth. Pritchard approached with a predator's patience, letting the silence build before he spoke. Dr. Voss, or should I say former Dr. Voss. I still have my medical degree, Rowan said evenly. The title remains valid even if the practice doesn't. Ah, yes, your practice. Let's discuss that, shall we? You were expelled from Mercy General Hospital 8 years ago, correct? I resigned under pressure after testifying in a lawsuit against one of their surgeons. You were asked to recant that testimony and refused. I was asked to lie. I refused. Or you were asked to retract false accusations and chose obstinacy over professionalism. Rowan's jaw tightened fractionally. The surgeon was drunk. A woman died because of his negligence. That's not accusation. That's fact. A fact the hospital disputed. A fact that cost you your career. Pritchard circled slightly, playing to the room. After losing your position, you retreated to a remote cabin. You've lived there alone for 8 years, practicing medicine on no one, speaking to no one. Would you say that's the behavior of a stable individual? Objection, Rhea said sharply. Dr. Voss's personal choices aren't on trial here. Holloway considered, then nodded. Sustained. Get to your point, Mr. Pritchard. My point, Your Honor, is character. Dr. Voss has demonstrated a pattern of poor judgment and isolation. When he finds Miss Calder on the mountain, conveniently, miraculously, he takes her to his cabin rather than bringing her to town for proper medical care. Why? Because she would have died before we reached town, Rowan said, his voice hard. The nearest doctor was 15 miles away through a blizzard. She had internal bleeding, multiple fractures, and was going into shock. Moving her that distance would have killed her. How fortunate that you, a disgraced doctor living alone in the wilderness, happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. I wasn't fortunate. I was there. I saw smoke from the accident, investigated, and found her. You saw smoke in a blizzard? Through heavy snow and wind? I know the mountain. I know what belongs and what doesn't. Smoke from that location didn't belong. Pritchard smiled thinly. Or perhaps you heard about a missing gold shipment and went looking for it. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Holloway's gavel cracked down. Order, Mr. Pritchard, that's speculation. Is it? Dr. Voss lives alone, presumably on limited means. A wagon full of gold passes near his territory. The wagon goes missing. The driver turns up at his cabin, conveniently injured but alive, and the gold vanishes. That's quite a coincidence. Rowan's pale eyes had gone cold as winter ice. Are you accusing me of theft, Mr. Pritchard? I'm suggesting the possibility of conspiracy. You find Miss Calder, help her stage her injuries to appear catastrophic. Stage? Rowan's voice could have cut glass. She had 3 broken ribs, a fractured pelvis, a dislocated shoulder, and was bleeding internally. Those aren't staged injuries. Those are life-threatening trauma, which you conveniently had the skills to treat. How much did she pay you, doctor? A percentage of the gold? Half? Rhea stood so fast her chair scraped loudly. Objection. He's inventing a conspiracy with no evidence. Miss Calder, Holloway began. No evidence? Pritchard wheeled on her. You disappear with a fortune in gold. You turn up at the cabin of a man desperate enough to throw away his career over principle. He treats you, hides you, and now defends you. That's not evidence. That's coincidence and assistance, Rhea shot back. I was dying. He saved me. That's what doctors do. Former doctors. Doctors with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Rowan stood suddenly, his control finally cracking. I gained nothing. She had nothing to give except a broken body and a will to survive. I helped her because she needed help, and I could provide it. That's all. Then where's the gold, doctor? If neither of you took it, where is it? At the bottom of a ravine, scattered in snow, buried under ice. I don't know. But I know she didn't take it, and neither did I. Pritchard let the silence stretch, let Rowan's anger hang in the air as evidence of guilt rather than righteousness. Then he turned to Holloway with practiced precision. No further questions, Your Honor. The witness has made his position clear. Holloway gestured to Rhea. Your witness. Rhea approached the stand, her mind racing. Pritchard had damaged Rowan's credibility, painted their entire relationship as suspicious. She needed to rebuild it, fast, without making it seem rehearsed. Dr. Voss, she began quietly, when you found me under that wagon, what did you think? He met her eyes, and some of the ice melted. I thought you were dying. Did you know who I was? No. Did you know about the gold shipment? No. I knew nothing about you, the cargo, or why you were there. So why help me at all? Why not just walk away? Rowan was quiet for a moment, considering. Because walking away would make me the same as everyone who'd walked away from me. And I swore when I came to that mountain that I'd never be that person. You risked your life lifting that wagon off me. Yes. Why? Because you were there and I could help. That's not a good enough reason for most people. Most people aren't worth much then. A ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom. Rhea pressed forward. In the months I stayed with you, did I ever mention the gold? No. Did I ever leave the cabin to retrieve anything I might have hidden? No, you couldn't walk for weeks. When you could walk, you barely made it to the woodpile. Did I have any money? Any resources? Nothing. The clothes on your back had been destroyed in the accident. Everything else was lost. So if I'd stolen $1,800 in gold, where is it? I have no idea. But it's not with her and it's not with me. Rhea paused, letting that sink in. Mr. Pritchard suggested you treated me in exchange for payment. Did I pay you anything? No. Did I offer to? She mentioned having small savings in Millridge. I told her I didn't want her money. Why not? Rowan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because she'd been crushed by a wagon and needed to heal. That doesn't have a price. Mr. Pritchard also suggested we conspired together. Did we ever discuss how to hide theft or evade justice? No. We discussed her recovery, medical procedures, survival skills. Nothing criminal. What did you think when the marshal arrived? I thought they were making the same mistake institutions always make, blaming the powerless because it's easier than investigating properly. Do you believe I stole that gold? No. How can you be certain? Rowan leaned forward slightly, his pale eyes holding hers with absolute conviction. Because I spent 3 months watching you fight to stand, to walk, to reclaim your strength. Someone who fights that hard to survive doesn't throw it away for gold they couldn't carry or spend. You wanted to live, that's all. The words landed with quiet force. Rhea felt them settle in her chest like stones, heavy, solid, unshakable. Rowan believed her, completely, and his certainty was more powerful than any evidence. Thank you, Dr. Voss. No further questions. Pritchard declined to cross-examine again, which told Rhea he was satisfied with the damage already done. Rowan returned to his seat, his expression closed but his eyes tracking Rhea with concern. Holloway made another note. Mr. Pritchard, do you have additional witnesses? No, Your Honor. The prosecution rests. Miss Calder, your defense? This was it. The moment Rhea had prepared for dreaded couldn't avoid. She stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom, and forced her voice steady. Your Honor, I'd like to testify on my own behalf. Murmurs again. Defending yourself was unusual enough. Testifying for yourself was almost unheard of. Too easy to be trapped by clever questions. Too risky for anyone with sense. But Rhea had learned months ago that sense and survival sometimes diverged. She took the stand, swore the oath, and faced Pritchard with the same steel she'd found under that wagon. "Miss Calder," Pritchard began smoothly, "let's start simple. Did you steal the gold?" "No." "Do you know where it is?" "At the bottom of the ravine, buried in snow and ice, exactly where it fell when the wagon went over." "You seem very certain for someone who was, by your own account, dying at the time." "I'm certain because I know I didn't take it. That's the only certainty I need." "You lived in a boarding house, correct? Working difficult jobs for minimal pay?" "Yes." "That must have been frustrating, exhausting, demoralizing." "It was life. I'm familiar with hard work." "Familiar with being overlooked, you mean? Being dismissed, treated as less than." Rhea felt the trap closing, but walked into it deliberately. "Yes. I've been treated as less than my entire life. By employers, landlords, neighbors, people who looked at me and saw nothing worth noticing." "That must have made you angry." "It made me tired." "Angry enough to take what you felt you deserved?" "I didn't take anything, and I don't base my worth on what other people think I deserve." Pritchard shifted tactics. "The Mountain Pass route. Your supervisor testified experienced drivers refused it. You took it anyway. Why?" "Because I needed work and it was offered." "Not because you saw an opportunity? Dangerous route, bad weather, easy to stage an accident?" "If I wanted to stage an accident, Mr. Pritchard, I'd have done it in a way that didn't break half my bones and nearly kill me." "Perhaps the accident was more severe than intended." "There was no intent. The road collapsed, the wagon fell. I nearly died. Those are facts, not plans." "Convenient facts that leave you as the only witness to what really happened." "Convenient for whom?" "I lost everything in that accident. My wagon, my cargo, my health, and apparently my reputation. What exactly did I gain?" Pritchard smiled coldly. $1,800 in gold. "Which I don't have, can't produce, haven't spent. If I stole it, where is it?" "That's what we're trying to establish." "No, you're trying to avoid establishing it. You want me convicted on suspicion and circumstance because actually proving theft requires evidence you don't have." The courtroom went very quiet. Holloway leaned forward slightly, attention caught. Pritchard's expression hardened. "You spent months with Dr. Voss. Alone. In isolation. What exactly was the nature of that relationship?" Rhea saw the trap, the implication, the suggestion that sex or impropriety somehow proved guilt. She met it head on. "I was his patient. He treated my injuries and ensured my survival. That's all. For 3 months? With no compensation? Doctors treat patients. That's what they do. Former doctors living in exile might have other motivations. If you're suggesting impropriety, say it clearly instead of hiding behind insinuation." Pritchard's eyes glittered. "Was your relationship with Dr. Voss inappropriate?" "My relationship with Dr. Voss was professional and necessary. He saved my life. I owe him everything. That's not inappropriate. That's mercy. Mercy that conveniently keeps you both silent about the missing gold." "We're not silent. We're honest. There's a difference." "Then be honest now, Miss Calder. Under oath. Did you take that gold?" "No." "Did Dr. Voss help you hide it?" "No." "Do you have any explanation for where it went?" "It's buried in snow at the accident site. Send men to search properly instead of just glancing at the wreckage and deciding I'm guilty." "We did search. We found only $200. Then search again. Better, deeper. Or accept that gold can be scattered by a fall and buried by winter. Either way, I didn't take it." Pritchard studied her, looking for cracks, finding none. "You're very composed for someone facing serious charges." "I'm tired of being afraid of powerful men making accusations they can't prove. So yes, I'm composed, angry, but composed." "Angry people make mistakes. Desperate people make mistakes. I'm not desperate, I'm just done." "Done with what?" "Being crushed." The words came out harder than intended, carrying weight beyond the courtroom. "I've been crushed by poverty, by indifference, by systems designed to grind people like me into dust. I survived being literally crushed by a wagon. I'm not going to be crushed by accusations built on assumption and prejudice." Silence filled the room. Even Pritchard seemed momentarily thrown. Rhea pressed the advantage. You want to convict me? Prove I took the gold. Show how I moved it, where I hid it, how I planned this. Don't just point at my poverty and assume guilt. Work for your conviction. Pritchard recovered quickly. The burden of proof isn't on the accused to disprove. The burden of proof is on you to prove. And you haven't. You've presented inventory sheets and suspicion. That's not evidence. That's convenience. The magistrate will decide what constitutes evidence. Then I trust he'll decide properly, because I didn't steal anything, and no amount of clever questioning will change that truth. Pritchard stared at her for a long moment, then turned to Holloway. No further questions, Your Honor. Rhea stepped down, legs shaking but voice steady. She'd done it. Faced down the prosecution, refused to break, demanded they meet their burden. Whether it was enough remained to be seen. Holloway called a brief recess while he reviewed his notes. Rhea sat at her table, acutely aware of Rowan behind her, but unable to turn, unable to acknowledge the support radiating from his presence. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Opinions seemed divided. Some faces showed sympathy, others skepticism, most simple curiosity about how this would end. When Holloway returned, his expression gave nothing away. He settled into his seat, arranged his papers with deliberate precision, then looked up. I've heard testimony from both sides, he began. The prosecution presents a circumstantial case: missing gold, missing driver, convenient refuge. The defense presents an alternative explanation: natural accident, scattered cargo, medical necessity. Neither side has definitive proof. Rhea's heart sank. This was the moment where assumption would win, where her poverty would be treated as guilt because it was easier than admitting doubt. But Holloway wasn't finished. However, I'm troubled by several aspects of the prosecution's case. First, the seal on the gold shipment. Mr. Pritchard couldn't confirm whether it was broken during the fall or before, which suggests the cargo's security was already compromised. Second, the search of the accident site appears to have been cursory at best. Gold coins scattered by a fall and buried by subsequent snowfall could easily be overlooked. Third, and most significantly, the prosecution has offered no evidence of how Miss Calder could have physically removed $1,800 in gold, a weight of approximately 40 pounds, while suffering injuries severe enough to require months of recovery. Hope flickered in Rhea's chest. Dr. Voss's testimony, despite attempts to discredit him, was consistent and detailed. His medical assessment of Miss Calder's injuries is supported by her obvious recovery timeline. The suggestion of conspiracy between them is undermined by the simple fact that neither has access to the missing gold. Holloway paused, letting his words settle. I'm not convinced beyond reasonable doubt that Miss Calder committed theft. The circumstances are suspicious, yes, but suspicion is not proof, and this court requires proof. Pritchard stood sharply. Your Honor, the missing gold is missing, Mr. Pritchard. That's not in dispute. What's in dispute is whether Miss Calder took it, and you haven't proven she did. You've proven it's gone. Those aren't the same thing. Then who did take it? That's not this court's question to answer. Our question is, did Rhea Calder steal that gold? And based on the evidence presented, I cannot conclude that she did. Holloway's gavel came down with finality. The charges are dismissed. Miss Calder, you're free to go. The courtroom exploded, voices raised in shock, anger, surprise. Pritchard was on his feet, objecting loudly about justice and precedent and company interests. Some spectators cheered, others shouted about corruption and favoritism. Rhea heard none of it. The words free to go echoed in her mind like bells, impossible and real, and more precious than any gold. She turned to find Rowan already moving toward her, cutting through the chaos with single-minded purpose. When he reached her, his hands closed on her shoulders, the first time he touched her outside of medical necessity, and his pale eyes blazed with fierce satisfaction. You did it, he said. We did it. No, you stood up and refused to break. That was all you. Before Rhea could respond, Marshal Cormac appeared at her elbow. You need to leave, now, before this gets uglier. He was right. Already some of the company men were pushing toward the front, their expressions dark. Pritchard was still arguing with Holloway, but his attention would turn to them soon enough. Rowan's hand shifted to the small of her back, guiding her toward the side exit. They moved quickly but not frantically, refusing to look like they were fleeing. Outside, the cool spring air hit Ria's face like a blessing. She'd won. Actually, won. But the victory felt incomplete, fragile. Dismissed charges weren't the same as proven innocence. The company would still believe she'd stolen their gold. The town would still whisper. And somewhere, the real truth was buried under snow and assumption. "What now?" she asked as they walked quickly down the muddy street. "Now we get you out of Millridge before Pritchard finds a way to refile charges or the company decides to handle this outside legal channels." "Where do I go?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, then said simply, "The cabin, until we figure out next steps." "I can't keep imposing." "You're not imposing. You're surviving. There's a difference." They'd reached the edge of town when a voice called out behind them. "Wait! Miss Calder, wait!" Ria turned to find Thomas Brennan hurrying toward them, his face flushed with effort and emotion. He stopped a few feet away, breathing hard. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About the gold." Rowan's hand moved to his coat where Ria knew he kept the pistol. "Speak carefully, Mr. Brennan." "The seal. On the shipment." Brennan looked around nervously, then leaned closer. "It was already broken when the wagon left Millridge. I noticed it when we loaded the cargo. Mentioned it to my supervisor. He said not to worry, that it was fine." Ria's breath caught. "Why didn't you say that in court?" "Because that supervisor is Pritchard's cousin. They're family. If I'd testified against him, I'd have lost my job. Maybe worse." Brennan's expression was miserable. "I'm not brave like you. I couldn't risk it, but I can't let you be blamed for something that might not be your fault." "Might not?" Rowan's voice was hard. "The gold could have been taken before the wagon ever left. Could have been shorted from the start and the seal broken to disguise it. I don't know, but I know you deserve the truth." "Will you testify to this officially?" Ria asked. I can't. My family depends on that job." Shame colored his voice. "But I had to tell you. Had to give you something." He was already backing away, ready to flee back to his safe silence. Ria wanted to be angry, to demand he do the right thing regardless of cost. But she understood too well the tyranny of necessity, the impossible choice between conscience and survival. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me." Brennan nodded once, then hurried away, disappearing into the town's morning traffic. Rowan watched him go with disgust. He knows the truth and won't speak it. He has children, a wife. He's making the same choice we've all made. Survive first, morality second. That's not morality, that's cowardice. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes you can't afford the luxury of righteousness. Ria started walking again, faster now. "But it doesn't matter. We know the gold might have been stolen before I ever touched that wagon. That's enough." "Is it?" "It has to be." They walked in silence through Millridge's outskirts, past buildings that looked shabbier in the morning light, past people who stared with undisguised curiosity. The dismissed charges would be all over town by noon. Some would believe in her innocence. Most would assume she'd gotten away with something. Ria found she didn't care. For the first time in her life, other people's assumptions felt like distant thunder, noticeable but not threatening. She'd stood in court and demanded proof. She'd refused to be crushed by accusation. And she'd won. Not perfectly, not completely, but won nevertheless. As they reached the road that would take them back up the mountain, back to the cabin that had become more home than anywhere else in her life, Rowan spoke again. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm done with Millridge. Done with freight companies and boarding houses and jobs where I'm disposable." She glanced at him. "What about you?" "I'm thinking 8 years of exile might be enough. That maybe there's a way to practice medicine again without compromising what I believe." "Where?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere that needs doctors more than they need reputation. Frontier settlements, mining camps, places too desperate to ask questions about credentials." "Sounds lonely." "It would be." He paused, then continued carefully. "Unless someone wanted to come along. Someone with medical knowledge and field experience. Someone who knows what it's like to rebuild from nothing." Ria's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "You're asking me to come with you." "I'm saying the offer stands. You're free now. You can go anywhere, do anything. But if you wanted..." He trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. If I wanted? Rowan stopped walking, turned to face her fully. I've spent 8 years alone, convinced that was what I deserved. That isolation was penance for choosing principle over pragmatism. But these last months, having you there, teaching you, working beside you, I remembered why I became a doctor in the first place. Not for money or status, to help people, to matter. You matter, Rhea said fiercely. You saved my life. You saved mine too, just in a different way. His pale eyes held hers with an intensity that stole breath. I'm asking if you want to build something new, together, not as doctor and patient, as partners. The word hung between them, weighted with possibility. Partners. Equal stakeholders in a shared venture. Not charity or obligation, but choice. Deliberate, mutual choice. Everything Rhea had learned on that mountain, every piece of strength she'd rebuilt from broken bones and shattered assumptions, had led to this moment. This choice. She could go back to boarding houses and freight jobs, could disappear into another town and another life of quiet survival, could be safe and small and invisible again. Or she could choose something terrifying and true, could build instead of just endure, could matter instead of just exist. The wilderness that had nearly killed her had also remade her into someone capable of this choice. Rhea smiled, feeling the unfamiliar expression stretch across her face like something new and permanent. Yes, partners. Let's build something worth fighting for. Rowan's answering smile was like sunrise, rare, brilliant, transformative. He offered his hand and she took it. The handshake was firm, professional, and absolutely binding. Then they turned toward the mountain, toward the cabin, toward a future neither of them could fully see, but both were ready to build. Behind them, Millridge continued its daily business, already forgetting about the woman who'd dared demand justice, and the man who'd believed she deserved it. Ahead, the wilderness waited. No longer hostile, just wilderness. A landscape of possibility where two exiles could write new stories on their own terms. The walk up the mountain felt different than the walk down. Lighter, freer. Each step carried them away from old defeats and toward something that didn't have a name yet but felt like hope. They reached the cabin as afternoon light filtered through the pines, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. The structure looked different now, not a refuge from death, but a foundation for something new. Smoke curled from the chimney where Rowan had banked the fire before leaving. Everything was exactly as they'd left it, yet everything had changed. Rhea stood in the doorway, breathing in the familiar scent of herbs and wood smoke, feeling the weight of the last hours settle into her bones. Free. The word still felt foreign, dangerous to believe too completely. Are you all right? Rowan asked, watching her with that penetrating awareness that missed nothing. I keep waiting for it to feel real, the acquittal, the choice, all of it. Give it time. Freedom takes adjustment when you've lived without it. He moved to the fireplace, coaxed the embers back to life with practiced efficiency. We should eat, then plan. They prepared a simple meal together, movement synchronized by months of shared space. Rhea sliced bread while Rowan heated stew left from 2 days prior. They ate in companionable silence, both too exhausted for conversation, both too wired to fully relax. Finally, over the last of the tea, Rowan spread a hand-drawn map on the table. It showed the mountain range, the valleys beyond, settlements marked with varying degrees of detail. I've been thinking about where we could go, he said. There are mining camps here, and here, his finger traced locations to the north, that have no permanent medical care. They lose men regularly to accidents, infection, basic injuries that proper treatment would prevent. They'd pay. In gold dust, supplies, whatever they have. It wouldn't be steady, but it would be work that matters. Rhea studied the map, calculating distances and difficulties. That's 3 weeks' travel, maybe more with spring mud. Closer options exist. Logging camps here, a railroad crew working through this pass, but the mining camps need us more, and they're less likely to care about credentials or history. You mean they're desperate enough to overlook a disgraced doctor and an accused thief? I mean they judge competence over reputation. You save a man's leg, he doesn't care where you trained or what you've been accused of. It made brutal sense. The frontier had always been where society's rejects remade themselves, where what you could do mattered more than who you'd been. Rhea had spent her life being judged for her past, orphaned, poor, disposable. The idea of a place where only the present counted felt like its own kind of freedom. "When would we leave?" she asked. "Week or two. Give you time to fully recover. Let me prepare supplies. We'll need—" A sharp knock interrupted him. Both froze. Visitors were rare enough to be suspicious. Visitors the day after a contentious trial were downright alarming. Rowan moved to the window, peered out carefully. His shoulders relaxed fractionally. It's the marshal. Alone. He opened the door to find Cormac standing in the clearing, looking tired and uncomfortable. The marshal held his hat in his hands, twisting the brim with obvious agitation. "Dr. Voss, Miss Calder, I apologize for the intrusion." "What do you want?" Rowan's voice carried no welcome. "To talk. Off the record." Cormac glanced behind him as if checking for followers. "May I come in?" Rowan stepped aside grudgingly. The marshal entered, declined the offered chair, and paced instead, 3 steps to the bookshelf, 3 back to the door. A man wrestling with conscience. "That business in court today," he began. "The magistrate made the right call legally. Not enough evidence for conviction. But that doesn't mean the company's going to let this go." "They can't refile," Rhea said. "The charges were dismissed. They can make your life hell in other ways, blacklist you from employment, spread rumors, make sure you're unemployable anywhere their influence reaches." Cormac stopped pacing, met her eyes. "Pritchard's furious. His cousin, the supervisor who handled that shipment, is being questioned now about the broken seal. If that investigation goes poorly, heads will roll. They'll want someone to blame." "Let me guess," Rowan said coldly. "They'll blame Rhea for starting the investigation that exposed their own theft." "Probably. Or they'll claim she's lying about the seal to cover her tracks. Either way, you're in danger." "Then we'll leave," Rhea said. "We were already planning to." "That's wise. But there's something else you should know." Cormac pulled a folded paper from his jacket, handed it to Rowan. "This came through official channels this morning, before the trial verdict. I was supposed to serve it after the case concluded." Rowan unfolded the document, scanned it quickly. His expression darkened. "A civil suit for damages. The company's filing against both of you. They can't put you in jail, so they're going for financial ruin instead, claiming you conspired to steal the gold, and they want compensation for the loss, plus damages, plus legal fees. Comes to about $5,000. Rhea's stomach dropped. 5,000. She'd never seen $100 at once in her entire life. 5,000 might as well be 5 million. "We don't have that kind of money," she said faintly. "They know. That's the point. They'll get a judgment, seize any assets you have, garnish any wages you earn. You'll spend the rest of your life working off a debt you can't pay for a crime you didn't commit." "Unless," Rowan asked, hearing the unspoken offer in Cormac's tone. The marshal looked deeply uncomfortable. "Unless you disappear. Completely. No forwarding address, no traceable employment, no official presence anywhere their lawyers can find you. Become ghosts." "You're telling us to run." "I'm telling you the system is rigged against people without money or power. You won a battle today. But they own the war. So yes, run. Build your life somewhere beyond their reach and don't look back." Silence settled over the cabin. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant ocean. Rhea felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down again. They'd won in court only to lose everywhere else. Freedom was an illusion when the powerful could simply rewrite the rules. "Why are you telling us this?" she asked. "You're a marshal. You're supposed to enforce their suit." Cormac's expression went hard. "I'm supposed to enforce the law, not help rich men crush innocent people because their pride got wounded. I saw what happened in that courtroom. Saw Pritchard trying to manufacture guilt from poverty and circumstance. Made me sick." He put his hat back on, adjusted it with sharp movements. "I'll file paperwork saying I couldn't locate you for service. That'll buy you a few weeks. After that, you're on your own." "Thank you," Rhea said quietly. "Don't thank me, just disappear well. And maybe, somewhere down the road, do some good with the life you're fighting so hard to keep." Cormac moved toward the door, paused. For what it's worth, I think you're both decent people caught in an indecent system. I hope you find somewhere better." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the mountain path. Rowan reread the civil suit document with clinical attention, then set it on the table like something contaminated. They're not going to stop, ever, unless we make ourselves impossible to find. How do we do that? We don't just move. We erase ourselves. No official records, no government registrations, no trail of any kind. We become people who exist outside the system entirely. It sounded like exile, but then Rhea had already been exiled from normal life. By poverty, by circumstance, by a wagon falling off a mountain. This would just be exile she chose deliberately instead of having it imposed. "The mining camps," she said. "No one keeps careful records there. People come and go, use different names, start over." Exactly. We become whoever we need to be. Do the work, help people, move on before anyone asks too many questions. That's no kind of life, always running, always hiding. It's survival, and survival is what we're good at. Rowan's pale eyes held hers with fierce intensity. We tried playing by their rules. We won and they changed the game, so we stopped playing entirely. We make our own rules in places they don't control. The plan was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Rhea had spent her whole life trying to fit into a system that rejected her at every turn. The idea of stepping outside it completely, of building a life in the spaces between official existence, felt like surrender and victory simultaneously. "All right," she said, "we ghost, but we do it right. Supplies, planning, a route that doesn't cross any official checkpoints. We'll need money. Not much, but some. For basics, we can't hunt or gather." Rhea thought of her meager savings, probably already claimed by her former landlord when she'd disappeared. Everything she owned had been in that boarding house room or on the wagon. She had nothing. Except, "Wait," she said suddenly. "The wagon. When it fell, I was carrying something, a small bag. Personal items? My pay from the previous week. About $30. Where? I don't know. It was on my belt when I went over. Might have stayed with my body, might have fallen off. But if it's still there..." Rowan was already moving, pulling gear from shelves. "We check the crash site. If your bag is there, we take it. If any of the scattered gold is visible, we take that too. The company's already written it off as stolen. Might as well make the accusation true in a way that actually helps us. That's theft. They're suing us for theft anyway, and I'd rather be guilty of taking what we need to survive than innocent and destroyed by their lawsuit." He handed her a pack. "Besides, you almost died delivering their gold. Consider it payment for services rendered." The logic was flawed, but tempting. Rhea had followed rules her entire life, and it had gotten her exactly nowhere. Maybe Rowan was right. Maybe survival required new ethics, built on practical necessity rather than abstract morality. "How far is the crash site from here?" she asked. 2 hours, 3 if we're careful about not being seen." "Then we go now, before someone else has the same idea." They prepared quickly, gathering rope and tools and Rowan's seemingly endless supply of practical equipment. The spring afternoon was fading toward evening, light going soft and golden. Perfect cover for people who didn't want to be noticed. The walk to the crash site took them along paths Rowan knew intimately, routes that avoided the main trail and any chance of encounter. Rhea's healing body protested the pace, but held. 3 months of recovery had rebuilt her strength, and the mountain that had nearly killed her now felt almost familiar. They reached the cliff edge as sunset painted the sky in shades of fire. Below, perhaps 40 feet down, the wreckage of the wagon sprawled across rocks and snow like a broken skeleton. The chassis had separated from the bed, wheels scattered in different directions. Cargo had indeed been flung far. Rhea could see the glint of metal between rocks, the dark shapes of supply crates broken open. And there, barely visible against dark stone, a small leather bag still attached to a belt. "That's mine," Rhea breathed. "That's my bag." Rowan assessed the descent with practiced eyes. Steep, but manageable. "We'll rope down, collect what we can carry, rope back up. 10 minutes. It took 15. The descent was treacherous, rock slick with melt and ice. But Rowan moved with mountain goat certainty, and Rhea followed his path exactly. They reached the wreckage and began searching with methodical efficiency. Rhea's bag was intact, the leather water-stained but serviceable. Inside, $32 in paper bills, a spare shirt, and a small knife. Not much, but infinitely more than nothing. Rowan searched the scattered cargo, finding gold coins lodged in rock crevices, buried in snow, rolled into impossible corners. He collected them with clinical efficiency, dropping them into a canvas sack with soft metallic clinks. How much? Rhea asked. Maybe 300 worth. Enough to fund supplies and travel. Enough to start over. $300 of the 1,800 they'd been accused of stealing. The irony wasn't lost on Rhea. They were making the accusation true, but only because fighting false accusations had left them no other choice. "Is this who we are now?" she asked quietly. "Thieves?" Rowan paused, a gold coin catching sunset light in his palm. "We're survivors. The difference is that thieves take because they want. We take because we have no other option. That distinction matters. Does it? To them, we'll still be criminals. They already decided we were criminals. We're just collecting payment for a conviction we were going to receive either way." He pocketed the coin, continued searching. "Besides, this gold was being transported between banks to enrich people who already have more than they need. We're redirecting it to people who'll use it to help others. That's not theft. That's redistribution." The rationalization was thin, but Rhea found she didn't care. Morality was a luxury of the comfortable. She'd been uncomfortable her entire life, and look where righteousness had gotten her. Nearly dead under a wagon, accused of crimes she didn't commit, facing financial ruin for surviving. "All right," she said, "we take what we need, and we don't apologize." They collected $280 in gold coins total, plus the 32 in paper bills from Rhea's bag. $312, more money than Rhea had ever held at once, enough to fund a new life if they were careful. The climb back up the cliff was harder, weighted with gold and growing darkness. But they made it, pulled themselves over the edge as the last light faded, and stood breathing hard in the purple twilight. Below, the wreckage that had nearly ended Rhea's life became just wreckage again. Metal and wood and the fading evidence of a story that would never be fully told. Let the company wonder what happened to their gold. Let them search and speculate in rage. She was done providing answers to people who wouldn't believe them anyway. They returned to the cabin in full darkness, navigating by memory and Rowan's intimate knowledge of the terrain. No one saw them. No one knew they'd been there. They'd become ghosts already, moving through a world that had stopped noticing them. Back in the cabin's warmth, they spread the gold on the table and counted it precisely. $283 in coins of various denominations. With the paper bills, $315 total. "Enough?" Rhea asked. "Enough to get started. We'll need more eventually, but we can earn that as we go. Medical work pays, even in rough camps, and you've learned enough to assist competently. Between us, we're worth hiring." "What about names? If we're erasing ourselves, we need to be someone else." Rowan considered. "I'll be Rowan Voss still. It's common enough not to draw attention, and I've earned the name through everything it's cost me. But Calder might be too connected to the trial. You should choose something new." The idea of renaming herself felt both liberating and disorienting. Rhea Calder had been nobody, nothing, perpetually dismissed. But she'd also been the woman who survived a crushing accident and fought back in court. Erasing that completely seemed wrong. "What about Reed?" she said. "Rhea Reed. Close enough to remember, different enough to obscure." "Rhea Reed." Rowan tested the name, nodded. "It works. Simple, forgettable, perfect for someone who wants to disappear." They spent the next 2 days preparing with military precision. Rowan compiled medical supplies into portable kits. Rhea sewed hidden pockets into their traveling clothes for the gold, distributing the weight so no single loss would destroy them. They studied maps, planned routes that avoided major towns and official roads. They practiced their new story, doctor and assistant, traveling to provide care in remote areas, no fixed address, no complicated history. On the third morning, they woke to find spring had truly arrived. The last snow was melting fast, streams running high and loud. Birds called from branches suddenly visible through retreating winter. The world was opening up, becoming navigable again. It was time to leave. They packed efficiently, taking only what they could carry and nothing that couldn't be replaced. Rowan walked through the cabin one final time, touching shelves and furniture with something like goodbye. This place had been his exile and sanctuary for 8 years. Leaving it meant closing that chapter completely. Any regrets? Rhea asked from the doorway. Only that I didn't leave sooner. That I let bitterness keep me isolated when I could have been doing good elsewhere. He joined her at the threshold, looked back at the space that had saved them both. But I needed this time. Needed to learn that being right doesn't guarantee vindication, that the world is smaller than the systems that run it, and sometimes you survive by finding the spaces between. Is that what we're doing? Finding spaces between? We're building something that doesn't require their permission or approval. Something that exists because we make it exist, not because they allow it. He closed the door firmly. That's more freedom than most people ever find. They walked down the mountain one final time, through forests coming alive with spring growth, past streams swollen with melt, under skies impossibly blue after months of gray. The world felt larger now, full of possibility instead of threat. At the base of the mountain, they turned north toward territories beyond the company's influence, beyond official record, beyond the reach of civil suits and accusations. They walked side by side, partners in survival, equals in exile. Behind them, Millridge continued its daily business. The Frontier Freight Company filed its lawsuit and raged about stolen gold and missing defendants. Pritchard's cousin was quietly dismissed for irregularities in cargo handling, though no charges were filed, protecting family being more important than admitting fault. Thomas Brennan kept his job and his silence, teaching his children that survival sometimes meant looking away from truth. None of it touched Rowan and Rhea anymore. They'd stepped outside that world completely, become people who existed in ledgers and rumors but nowhere official. The first mining camp appeared after 2 weeks of hard travel. It was exactly as brutal as expected, a collection of tents and rough structures clinging to a mountainside, men covered in dust and desperation, danger lurking in every unstable tunnel and improvised tool. The camp boss took one look at Rowan's medical bag and Rhea's competent demeanor and hired them on the spot. You treat injuries, you get paid in gold dust, he said. You save lives, you get bonuses. Lose men, you get nothing. Simple math. Simple math, Rowan agreed. They set up a medical tent on the camp's edge, far enough from the noise to work, but close enough for emergencies. The first patient came within hours. A man with a badly infected hand, 2 days from losing it to gangrene. Rowan cleaned and debrided the wound while Rhea prepared antibiotics from the herbs they'd brought. The man screamed but survived. By evening, word had spread. Real doctor in camp, knows what he's doing, actually saves people. The work was endless, brutal, and precisely what they needed. Men with crushed fingers, broken ribs, deep lacerations from rock and metal. Rhea assisted with steady hands and growing confidence, her months of training under Rowan proving invaluable. She learned to suture, to set bones, to recognize symptoms of serious illness before they became catastrophic. Between patients, they planned their next move. Mining camps were temporary by nature, played out veins and moving on. They'd stay 3 months, maybe 4, then relocate before anyone asked too many questions. Build a circuit of camps and settlements, always moving, always helping, never staying long enough to be found. One evening, 2 months into their first posting, Rhea sat outside the medical tent watching sunset paint the mountains in impossible colors. Rowan emerged from treating a cave-in victim, successful surgery, good prognosis, and settled beside her. Tired? He asked. Exhausted? Fulfilled? She glanced at him. Is this what it was like, before the hospital politics, when you first started practicing? Better. This is pure medicine. No administrators, no insurance, no bureaucracy, just injuries and solutions. It's what I always wanted. Then we found it, the thing worth fighting for. We did. He was quiet for a moment, then continued carefully. I've been thinking about the future, about what happens when we're too old to keep moving camp to camp. That's years away. But worth considering, we could save money, eventually buy land somewhere remote, build a permanent practice for frontier families, a place people could come for real medical care without the judgment or expense of town doctors. The vision was clear. A small clinic in the middle of nowhere, serving people who'd been forgotten by everyone else. Outcasts treating outcasts,
Building community from the pieces society discarded. It sounded perfect. I'd like that, Ria said.
But I'd want to do more than just medicine. Teach people basic care so they're not completely helpless between doctor visits. Maybe take in apprentices. Train them properly instead of making them pay thousands for formal education. A frontier medical school. Rowan's expression lit with interest. Teaching practical skills to people who can't afford traditional training. That could work. It would drive the medical establishment insane. Even better. They sat in companionable silence, planning a future that had seemed impossible months ago. Two exiles building something from nothing, proving that survival could transform into purpose if you were stubborn enough. A shout from the camp pulled them back to present. Another injury, another emergency. Rowan grabbed his bag and they ran toward the sound, partners in practice and possibility. The months became years. They moved through mining camps, logging operations, railroad crews, anywhere desperate men did dangerous work for minimal pay. Their reputation grew, whispered between workers. Dr. Voss and his assistant, they'll save you if anyone can. They didn't ask questions, didn't judge, just did the work. Ria's skills expanded until she could handle most injuries independently. Rowan supervising only the complicated cases. She learned surgery, pharmacology, diagnosis with limited equipment. She became someone miners trusted with their lives, and their trust was never misplaced. The gold they'd taken from the crash site funded their travels until their earnings could sustain them. They never spoke of it as theft, never questioned the ethics of that choice. It had been survival, and survival didn't require justification. 3 years into their nomadic practice, they had enough saved to purchase land, 40 acres in a valley so remote it didn't even have a name on official maps. They built a clinic from timber and stone, constructing it with their own hands over 2 summers. The structure was simple but solid. Treatment rooms, a surgery, living quarters, and space for future expansion. Word spread slowly, but it spread. Frontier families came from miles around, paying in whatever they had, vegetables, labor, game meat, occasionally actual money. Ria treated a woman through difficult childbirth and gained a lifelong advocate who told everyone within 100 miles. Rowan saved a child from pneumonia, and the grateful father built them a barn without being asked. They took in their first apprentice 4 years after leaving Millridge, a young woman fleeing an arranged marriage, desperate for any alternative to the life assigned her. Ria saw herself in those frightened eyes and offered training instead of sympathy. The woman stayed 3 years, learned everything they could teach, and left to start her own practice in a mining camp 2 territories over. Others followed. Outcasts and misfits, people running from pasts they couldn't escape in civilized places. Some stayed weeks, some stayed years. All left knowing they'd been seen as more than their worst moments, taught skills that gave them purpose beyond mere survival. The clinic became known throughout the frontier, the place where everyone was welcome, where care was never refused for lack of payment, where judgment was reserved for those who refused to help themselves. It wasn't much by civilized standards. Rough buildings in the middle of nowhere, serving people most doctors wouldn't even acknowledge. But it was theirs. Built from nothing, run by choice, existing outside the systems that had tried so hard to destroy them both. 10 years after the wagon accident, Ria stood on the clinic's porch watching dawn break over mountains that had once nearly killed her. She was 36 now, her hands scarred from a decade of medicine, her face weathered by sun and wind, her body lean and strong from constant work. Rowan emerged with coffee, handed her a cup, settled into the chair beside hers. He was perhaps 60 now, gray threading his beard and hair, his sharp edges slightly softened by time and satisfaction. But his pale eyes were as piercing as ever, missing nothing. "Thinking?" he asked. "Remembering. The wagon, the trial, all of it." Regrets? "None. That accident was the best thing that ever happened to me." He laughed, surprised. "You nearly died." "I did die. The person I was, invisible, disposable, powerless, she died under that wagon. Who I became after is someone I actually like." "You became that person before the accident. You just didn't know it yet." "Maybe. But the mountain showed me. The trial proved it. And you?" She turned to look at him directly. "You believed it when I couldn't. You did the same for me." reminded me that medicine matters more than the institutions that try to control it, that helping people is worth any cost. He raised his cup in a small salute. Partners. Partners. They drank their coffee and watched the sun climb higher, painting the valley in gold. Below, a patient was already approaching. A man leading a limping horse, clearly hoping the doctors would treat animals too. They would. They treated anyone who needed it. The frontier remained harsh, but they'd carved a space within it where harshness became opportunity, where exile transformed into purpose. They'd been crushed by systems designed to destroy people like them. And from that crushing, they'd built something those systems could never touch or diminish. Rhea had spent 26 years being invisible, dismissed, expendable. Then a wagon fell, and a stranger lifted it, and everything changed. Not because the world became kinder, it hadn't, but because she'd learned to fight for herself, to demand space instead of accepting scraps, to build instead of just endure. The wilderness hadn't just tested her, it had remade her into someone undeniable, someone who changed everything she touched simply by refusing to disappear. And that, Rhea thought as she stood to greet the approaching patient, was worth more than any gold. The woman who'd nearly died invisible had become someone impossible to overlook. The man who'd been destroyed by righteousness had found redemption in practical mercy. Together, they'd built a life that proved exile could be transformed into freedom if you were brave enough to choose it. Their story wouldn't appear in any official record. No one would write their names in medical journals or celebrate their achievements in society papers. The systems that had tried to erase them would never acknowledge their success. But in remote valleys and distant camps, in whispered recommendations between desperate people, in the lives saved and apprentices trained and communities served, their legacy lived on. Two ghosts who'd learned to haunt the spaces between official existence, doing good that didn't require permission or approval, building something permanent from the temporary shelter of shared survival. The sun climbed higher. The patient reached the porch. Rowan set down his cup and grabbed his medical bag. "Shall we?" he said to Rhea. She smiled, fierce and free. "Always." And together they went to work.